There is a moment in every sensitive soul's journey when the weight of the world becomes unbearable, not the physical world, with its concrete burdens and measurable sorrows, but the invisible realm of feeling that most humans have learned to navigate with careful numbness. You know this moment intimately. It arrives like a tsunami of raw sensation crashing through the carefully constructed levees of social conditioning, flooding every corner of your being with an intensity that leaves others standing dry and bewildered on distant shores. They watch you drowning in what they cannot see, cannot feel, cannot fathom. To them, you are simply too much, a phrase that has followed you like a shadow since childhood, whispered in concerned tones by well-meaning relatives, spoken with exasperation by overwhelmed friends, delivered with clinical detachment by professionals who mistake your depth for dysfunction. Too much feeling, too much crying, too much anger, too much joy even for yes. They fear your ecstasy as much as your despair, your capacity to be moved by beauty as much as your tendency to be shattered by ugliness. But what if I told you that this supposed curse, this overwhelming flood of emotion that sets you apart from the sleepwalking masses, is actually the seed of your greatest gift? What if the very sensitivity that has been pathologized, medicated, and scorned is the precise quality needed to navigate the profound depths of the human soul in an age that has forgotten how to feel? You see, dear one, you have been born into a world in the throes of what Jung called the Great Disconnection, a collective severing from the feeling function that once connected humanity to the sacred, to nature, to the depths of our own being. You are not broken. You are awake. You are not diseased. You are refusing to participate in the collective anesthesia that has become our species' default response to the pain of existence. Consider the chrysalis for a moment, that mysterious vessel within which the caterpillar must literally dissolve, its entire cellular structure breaking down into primordial soup before it can reconstitute as something capable of flight. The process is violent, chaotic, seemingly destructive. If we could hear the caterpillar's experience, it might sound very much like madness. Yet this apparent dissolution is not death, but transformation, not ending, but becoming. Your emotional intensity serves a similar function. It is the psyche's way of dissolving the false structures that would confine your authentic self, breaking down the rigid personas and adapted behaviors that keep you small, safe, and ultimately lifeless. The very overwhelm you experience is often your soul's rebellion against a life that has become too narrow, too numb, too removed from the wild, pulsing truth of what it means to be fully human. I invite you to consider your tears not as weakness but as the natural response of a system that refuses to become desensitized to suffering, both your own and that of the world. Your anger is not inappropriate. It is the healthy response of a psyche that will not accept injustice, mediocrity, or the slow death of settling for less than authentic existence. Your joy, when it comes, is not disturbing but revolutionary, a radical act of aliveness in a world that has forgotten how to celebrate its own existence. The ancient Greeks understood something we have lost, that there are different types of sensitivity, different qualities of feeling. They distinguished between pathos, the passive suffering that overwhelms and diminishes, and what we might call sacred feeling, the capacity to be moved by life without being destroyed by it. Your journey is not about eliminating feeling, but about transforming pathos into something more conscious, more purposeful, more aligned with your deepest nature. You have been told that emotional equilibrium means feeling very little, that mental health looks like a flat line on the monitor of consciousness. But this is the equilibrium of death, not life. True emotional health resembles not a still pond, but a river, sometimes rushing, sometimes gentle, always moving, always responsive to the landscape through which it flows. Your depths are not pathology, they are geography. Your intensity is not illness, it is weather. In the old stories, the heroes who were called to the greatest adventures were always marked by a wound, a difference, a quality that set them apart from ordinary folk. Chiron, the wounded healer, could cure others because his own wound would not heal, keeping him eternally connected to suffering and therefore to compassion. The Fisher King's wound reflected the wasteland of his kingdom, and only someone capable of feeling both the king's pain and the land's sorrow could restore fertility to the realm. You are such a figure, wounded by feeling, marked by sensitivity, carrying within your very constitution the capacity to sense what others have learned to ignore. This is not accident, but calling. You have been entrusted with the feeling function not for your own sake alone, but for the sake of a world that has forgotten how to grieve its losses, how to rage at its injustices, how to wonder at its mysteries. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote of the terrible angels who would destroy us with their beauty if we truly saw them. Your emotional sensitivity is such an angel, terrible in its intensity, devastating in its truth, yet ultimately necessary for any authentic encounter with the depths of existence. You have not been cursed with feeling. You have been blessed with the capacity to serve as a bridge between the numbed surface of modern consciousness and the wild, sacred depths that lie buried beneath layers of collective forgetting. But this calling comes with a price, and you have paid it in the currency of isolation, misunderstanding, and the peculiar exhaustion that comes from swimming against the current of cultural indifference. You have been the one who cries at movies while others check their phones, who feels the weight of global suffering while others debate statistics, who perceives the soul death in corporate environments while others climb ladders built from the bones of their own authenticity. This isolation is not punishment, but initiation. Every shamanic tradition recognizes that those called to heal must first be broken by the very forces they will later learn to work with. The wounded healer does not heal despite their wound, but because of it. Your emotional wounds are not obstacles to your purpose. They are the very means by which you develop the sensitivity necessary to serve as a guide for others lost in the wilderness of modern numbness. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, that shared repository of human experience that connects us all beneath the surface of individual consciousness. Your emotional sensitivity makes you a natural receiver of transmissions from this deeper realm. You feel not only your own pain but the accumulated suffering of generations. You carry not only your own joy but the species-wide longing for connection, meaning and transcendence. This is why your emotions often seem disproportionate to immediate circumstances. You are not just responding to the present moment, but to the eternal human condition, to the love that was never expressed, the grief that was never honored, the rage that was never allowed, the wonder that was systematically educated out of existence. You are an antenna for the collective shadow, a receiver of the broadcasts that most have learned to tune out. Understanding this begins to shift the very nature of your relationship with your own emotional intensity. What seemed like personal pathology reveals itself as species-wide sensitivity. What felt like individual weakness becomes collective service. You begin to see that your refusal to numb yourself is not self-indulgence, but a form of cultural resistance, a way of maintaining connection to the full spectrum of human experience in an age of selective blindness. The word curse comes from the Latin currere, meaning to run, as in the course of events set in motion by divine will. Your emotional intensity is indeed a curse in this original sense, not a punishment, but a destiny, a course of experience that was always meant to be yours. It runs through your life like a river, runs through a landscape, carving canyons of depth, creating valleys of compassion, nourishing the growth of wisdom that can only come from intimate acquaintance with the full range of human feeling. You are being prepared for something, shaped by your very sensitivity into an instrument capable of registering the subtle frequencies of the soul, like a tuning fork that vibrates in response to its proper note. You cannot help but resonate with the hidden harmonies and discordances of existence. This is not malfunction but precise calibration. Yet the world tells you otherwise. It offers you medications to flatten your peaks and valleys, distractions to pull you away from your depths, philosophies that promise peace through detachment. These may bring temporary relief, but they come at the cost of your essential nature, turning you into a stranger to yourself, an exile from your own emotional landscape. The invitation here is radical. What if, instead of trying to cure your sensitivity, you learn to honor it? What if, instead of seeking to eliminate your emotional intensity, you develop the capacity to work with it consciously? What if your very depth of feeling is not the problem to be solved, but the gift to be unwrapped, the talent to be developed, the calling to be answered? This does not mean drowning in emotion or being swept away by every feeling that arises. The sacred vessel of consciousness can hold intense emotion without being shattered by it, can contain the fires of feeling without being consumed. But this capacity must be developed through practice, through conscious relationship with your inner world, through learning to be present with your feelings rather than being possessed by them. Your sensitivity is a form of intelligence, emotional intelligence in its deepest sense. It is the capacity to read the subtle communications of the psyche, to understand the symbolic language of symptoms and dreams, to perceive the underlying currents that move beneath the surface of conscious awareness. This intelligence cannot be developed through books or theories, but only through lived experience, through willingness to feel deeply and reflect consciously on what you feel. In the hero's journey, there comes a moment when the would-be hero must choose between the comfortable known and the challenging unknown, between the safety of the village and the adventure of the quest. Your emotional sensitivity places you perpetually at this threshold. You cannot retreat into the comfortable numbness that others mistake for peace, cannot settle for the shallow waters of surface existence. You are called to the depths, summoned to explore territories of consciousness that most fear to approach. This calling is not always convenient. It makes you unreliable for small talk, unsuited for environments that require emotional dishonesty, incapable of pretending that everything is fine when it clearly is not. But these apparent limitations are actually profound clarifications. Your sensitivity serves as a compass pointing always toward authenticity, depth, and truth. The world needs what you carry. In an age of unprecedented external connectivity coupled with profound internal disconnection, your capacity to feel deeply serves as a reminder of what has been lost and what must be recovered. Your tears water the parched earth of collective consciousness. Your anger ignites the fires of necessary change. Your joy illuminates possibilities that have been forgotten in the grey haze of modern disillusionment. But first you must learn to see your emotional intensity, not as burden but as calling, not as curse but as gift, not as evidence of your brokenness, but as proof of your wholeness. You must recognize that in a world that has largely chosen numbness over feeling, your refusal to participate in the collective anesthesia is a radical act of consciousness, a form of rebellion against the forces that would reduce human experience to its most manageable, most marketable, most lifeless components. Your journey is just beginning. The overwhelm you feel now is the birth pang of a new way of being, one that honors feeling without being enslaved by it, that embraces sensitivity without being destroyed by it, that transforms the very quality that has made you feel like an outsider into the bridge that connects you to the deepest truths of human existence. You are not too much. The world is simply too little. Too little depth, too little feeling, too little aliveness. You carry the medicine for this collective illness. But first you must learn to see your own emotional intensity, not through the eyes of a culture that fears feeling, but through the lens of your own deeper wisdom, your own essential nature, your own irreplaceable contribution to the healing of a world that has forgotten how to feel. This is your initiation, your calling, your sacred wound that must become your sacred gift. The curse of feeling everything is about to reveal itself as the blessing it has always been. The capacity to serve as a bridge between the numbed surface of modern life and the wild, sacred depths where all true healing begins. Behold the vast machinery that surrounds you, not the visible infrastructure of roads and buildings, but the invisible architecture of emotional suppression that masquerades as civilization itself. It operates with such seamless efficiency that most never recognize its presence, like fish unaware of the water in which they swim. Yet you, with your heightened sensitivity, can perceive its mechanisms everywhere, in the pharmaceutical advertisements that promise to flatten the peaks and valleys of human feeling, in the entertainment systems designed to distract rather than illuminate, in the productivity culture that demands you perform rather than process the deeper currents of your inner life. This is the great numbing, humanity's most successful collective project, a shadow epidemic that has spread so thoroughly that its symptoms are mistaken for signs of health. It represents nothing less than a systematic war against the feeling function, a coordinated assault on the very capacity that once connected our species to the sacred dimensions of existence, to the natural world, to the depths of our own souls. You have been born into the culmination of this process, the endpoint of centuries of gradual disconnection from what Jung called the feeling function, one of the four primary ways consciousness relates to reality. Where once feeling served as a compass for value, meaning, and authentic relationship, now it has been relegated to the realm of inconvenience, something to be managed, medicated, or transcended in service of more rational ways of being. But what presents itself as rationality is often something far more sinister, the rationalization of a collective defense against the pain of being fully alive. The great numbing is not the absence of feeling, but the systematic replacement of authentic emotion with manufactured substitutes, not the elimination of suffering, but its transformation into a commodity to be consumed rather than a teacher to be honored. Consider the architecture of a modern city, where you might walk for miles without encountering a single space designed to honor the human need for solitude, reflection, or communion with the natural world. The urban landscape itself reflects the psychological landscape of a civilization that has lost touch with the rhythms and requirements of the feeling life. Everything is designed for efficiency, productivity, consumption, nothing for the simple act of being present with what is arising in the depths of consciousness. This is not accident, but design. The great numbing serves powerful interests. For people who are disconnected from their authentic feelings are far easier to manipulate, more compliant as consumers, less likely to question systems that serve profit over purpose. A population capable of deep feeling would be dangerous to structures built on exploitation, inequality, and the systematic destruction of the natural world. The great numbing is both symptom and cause of humanity's current crisis, the loss of connection to the sacred that manifests as ecological destruction, social fragmentation, and spiritual emptiness. You can see its mechanisms operating everywhere once you learn to recognize them. The pharmaceutical industry, with its billions invested in convincing people that emotional pain is a disease to be cured rather than information to be honored. The entertainment complex, designed not to inspire or illuminate, but to provide temporary escape from the growing emptiness at the heart of modern existence. The education system that trains young minds to analyze and categorize, while systematically neglecting the development of emotional intelligence, empathy, and the capacity for wonder. Perhaps most insidiously, the great numbing operates through the redefinition of mental health itself. What was once understood as the natural ebb and flow of emotional life, the necessary seasons of joy and sorrow, expansion and contraction, connection and solitude, has been pathologized as bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, or any number of diagnostic categories that reduce the complexity of human feeling to medical problems requiring pharmaceutical solutions. This is not to diminish genuine suffering or to suggest that medication is never helpful, but it is to recognize that we live in a culture that has forgotten the difference between pain that serves growth and pain that serves destruction, between the sacred wound that opens us to deeper life and the pathological symptom that signals disconnection from life. The great numbing cannot make this distinction because it fears all intensity, suspects all depth, and trusts only what can be measured, managed, and monetized. You have felt the pressure of this system your entire life. The subtle and not so subtle messages that your depth is dysfunction, that your sensitivity is pathology, that your refusal to participate in the collective numbness marks you as somehow defective. From childhood, you were likely encouraged to cheer up, to get over it, to think positive thoughts rather than to explore what your feelings might be trying to communicate about the state of your soul or the health of your environment. The great numbing operates through a sophisticated network of cultural myths designed to make emotional suppression seem not only normal, but virtuous. The myth of the strong individual who needs no one, feels nothing deeply, and faces all challenges with stoic indifference. The myth of progress through technology, which promises that external innovation can solve internal emptiness. The myth of the rational mind as the highest human faculty, which dismisses emotion as primitive, unreliable, and fundamentally untrustworthy. These myths work together to create what Jung would recognize as a massive dissociation, a splitting of consciousness that banishes the feeling function to the shadow while elevating thinking and doing as the only legitimate ways of being in the world. The result is a civilization of walking wounded, people who have learned to function efficiently while remaining fundamentally disconnected from their own depths, their authentic desires, their capacity for genuine intimacy with life itself. The shadow of this massive suppression does not simply disappear. Like all repressed psychological content, it finds indirect expression through symptoms that seem unrelated to their emotional origins. The epidemic of anxiety that plagues modern life often represents the psyche's attempt to feel something, anything, in a world designed to eliminate feeling. The widespread depression that affects millions may be less a medical condition than a natural response to living in ways that contradict the deepest requirements of the human soul. Physical illness, too, often carries the burden of unfelt emotion. The body becomes the repository for feelings that consciousness refuses to acknowledge, manifesting as autoimmune conditions, chronic pain, digestive disorders, and countless other ailments that resist purely medical treatment because their roots lie in the realm of suppressed feeling. The great numbing creates not health but a different kind of sickness, one that appears functional on the surface while slowly destroying the capacity for authentic aliveness from within. You can observe this shadow epidemic in the quality of human relationships, which have become increasingly shallow, transactional, and mediated by technology, rather than genuine presence. People gather in groups, while remaining fundamentally alone, sharing information while hiding their authentic selves, pursuing connection while armoring themselves against the vulnerability that true intimacy requires. The great numbing has taught them to fear their own depths, and therefore to fear the depths of others. The workplace becomes a theater, where everyone performs competence while hiding their humanity, where stress is worn as a badge of honor, and emotional authenticity is seen as unprofessional weakness. Families gather around screens rather than around the fires of genuine conversation, sharing space while remaining strangers to each other's inner worlds. Communities fragment into isolated units of consumption, losing the capacity for the kind of collective feeling that once bound people together in times of both celebration and crisis. Perhaps nowhere is the shadow of the great numbing more visible than in humanity's relationship to death and grief. A culture that fears feeling above all else cannot tolerate the intense emotions that accompany loss, transition, and the natural cycles of ending and beginning. Death is hidden away in institutions, grief is expected to follow predetermined timelines, and the natural human need to mourn is pathologized as depression or complicated bereavement requiring professional intervention. Yet grief, as you may have discovered in your own journey, is not pathology but one of the most sacred emotions available to human consciousness. It represents the price of love, the depth of connection, the acknowledgement of what matters most deeply. A culture that cannot grieve cannot truly love, for love requires the willingness to be vulnerable to loss. The great numbing promises to protect us from grief's pain, but in doing so it also protects us from love's joy, connection's meaning, and life's essential aliveness. The machinery of suppression operates not through overt force, but through seduction, offering seemingly attractive alternatives to the challenging work of feeling deeply. It promises that happiness can be purchased, that fulfillment can be achieved through external accomplishment, that peace can be found through the elimination of all difficult emotions. These promises are particularly seductive because they contain kernels of truth wrapped in fundamental deceptions. Yes, external circumstances can affect emotional well-being, but the promise that the right job, relationship, or lifestyle will eliminate emotional pain is a fantasy that keeps people perpetually seeking outside themselves for what can only be found within. Yes, positive thinking can influence experience, but the demand that consciousness remain perpetually positive is a form of emotional fascism that banishes half of human experience to the realm of the unacceptable. You have likely encountered the spiritual version of this numbing, which promises transcendence through detachment, enlightenment through the elimination of desire, and peace through the cessation of feeling. While these traditions may contain profound wisdom, they are often misunderstood and misapplied by a culture desperate to escape rather than transform its relationship to emotion. True spiritual development does not eliminate feeling, but refines it, does not escape emotion but transforms it into wisdom and compassion. The great numbing has even colonized the language we use to describe emotional experience. Depression becomes a chemical imbalance rather than a natural response to depressing circumstances. Anxiety becomes a disorder rather than a signal that something in our lives or our world requires attention. Anger becomes pathological rather than a healthy response to injustice or boundary violation. By medicalizing the full spectrum of human emotion, the culture of numbness ensures that feeling is always seen as problem rather than intelligence, symptom rather than communication. Yet you, with your heightened sensitivity, serve as a living reminder of what has been lost in this great numbing. Your refusal to participate fully in the collective anesthesia makes you a carrier of the feeling function for the culture at large. When you weep not only your own tears, but the tears of all those who have forgotten how to cry. When you rage, you carry the righteous anger of everyone who has been taught that anger is always inappropriate. When you rejoice, you celebrate with the joy of those who have forgotten how to be moved by beauty. This is both burden and blessing, both wound and gift. It means you cannot retreat into comfortable numbness when the world's pain becomes overwhelming. You cannot simply change the channel when confronted with suffering, cannot medicate away your awareness of what is broken in the world around you, but it also means you remain connected to the sources of authentic vitality that the great numbing has systematically severed for most people. You are living proof that another way is possible, that consciousness can learn to work with feeling rather than against it, that sensitivity can be developed into wisdom rather than medicated into submission, that the full spectrum of human emotion can be honored as sacred rather than feared as pathology. Your very existence is a form of resistance to the forces that would reduce human experience to its most manageable, most profitable, most controllable elements. The great numbing presents itself as evolution, as progress beyond the primitive emotionality of our ancestors, but you sense the profound regression hidden beneath this narrative, the loss of capacities that once connected humans to the sacred dimensions of existence, to the natural world, to the depths of their own being. What appears as sophistication is often simply successful disconnection from the sources of meaning that make life worth living. This disconnection creates what Jung would recognize as a massive neurosis on the collective level, a splitting of consciousness that banishes essential aspects of human nature to the shadow, while constructing a persona of rationality, efficiency, and control. The price of this splitting is the gradual death of the soul, the slow extinction of the qualities that make us most fully human. Yet even as the great numbing appears to triumph, creating a world of sleepwalkers moving through the motions of life without ever fully awakening to its depth, something in the human spirit continues to rebel. You are part of this rebellion, a representative of consciousness that refuses to be anesthetized, of feeling that will not be medicated into submission, of sensitivity that insists on its own validity despite all cultural pressure to the contrary. Your emotional intensity, which you have been taught to see as personal failing, is actually a form of cultural healing. Your tears are medicine for a parched world. Your anger is fire for necessary transformation. Your joy is light in gathering darkness. Your sensitivity is the canary in the coal mine of collective consciousness, warning of toxic levels of disconnection that threaten the very survival of what is most essentially human. The great numbing cannot last forever, for it is based on the impossible premise that human beings can thrive while remaining disconnected from their own depths. Like all attempts to deny fundamental aspects of nature, It creates pressures that eventually demand release. Your own journey represents part of this necessary return, the gradual reclamation of the feeling function that must occur if humanity is to survive its current crisis with its essential humanity intact. In the chapters ahead, we will explore how this reclamation occurs, how consciousness learns to work with feeling rather than against it, how sensitivity transforms from burden into gift. But first, it is necessary to see clearly the magnitude of what has been lost, the sophistication of the systems that maintain the great numbing, and the profound courage required to choose feeling over numbness in a world that has forgotten the sacred nature of emotional depth. You are not broken. You are awake. You are not diseased. You are refusing to participate in a collective illness. Your task is not to cure your sensitivity, but to develop it into wisdom, not to eliminate your emotional intensity, but to transform it into a force for healing and awakening. The great numbing is real, but it is not permanent. Through conscious individuals like yourself, the feeling function can return to its rightful place in human consciousness, not as primitive relic, but as essential intelligence, not as obstacle to transcendence, but as the very path by which consciousness learns to embrace the fullness of what it means to be authentically, courageously, sacredly alive. Here, in this liminal space between authentic self and social survival, you encounter the most seductive enemy of your emotional truth, the persona of perfect indifference that society rewards with approval, advancement, and the illusion of belonging. This is not the crude mask of obvious pretense, but the sophisticated facade of having transcended the messiness of human feeling, of existing in a realm above the petty concerns of emotional vulnerability. You know this mask intimately, for you have been pressured to wear it since childhood. It is the face that smiles when your heart is breaking, but remains calm when injustice ignites your righteous fury, that projects competence when confusion overwhelms your inner landscape. It is the persona that has learned to navigate social spaces by becoming a masterpiece of emotional camouflage, blending seamlessly into environments that reward the appearance of invulnerability, while punishing any authentic expression of the soul's deeper currents. Jung understood the persona as necessary for social functioning, the face we wear to meet the faces we meet, the adaptive mask that allows consciousness to interface with collective expectations. But what you have been asked to construct goes far beyond healthy adaptation. You have been pressured to create not just a social face, but a complete alternative identity, one that not only hides your emotional depth, but actively denies its existence, treating your sensitivity as a shameful secret to be concealed at all costs. This mask of indifference presents itself as sophistication, as emotional maturity, as the pinnacle of human development. It suggests that true strength lies in needing nothing, feeling nothing deeply, remaining untouched by the chaos and beauty that move through the world, like weather through an open sky. Those who wear it successfully are rewarded with positions of authority, social status, and the admiration of others who mistake emotional numbness for wisdom, detachment for enlightenment. You have seen this persona's perfect representatives, the executives who can announce layoffs without a tremor in their voice, the politicians who can discuss human suffering with statistical detachment, the spiritual teachers who speak of transcending emotion while their own shadows leak unprocessed feeling into every interaction. They move through the world with an aura of untouchable calm, and part of you has been trained to envy their apparent freedom from the storms that regularly devastate your inner landscape. But you have also glimpsed what lies beneath the mask, the profound emptiness that masquerades as fullness, the death in life that presents itself as transcendence, the desperate isolation that hides behind claims of self-sufficiency. For the persona of perfect indifference is built on a fundamental lie that human beings can thrive while remaining disconnected from the very source of vitality, meaning, and authentic connection that makes existence worth living. The construction of this mask begins early, often in childhood homes where emotional expression was met with discomfort, dismissal, or outright hostility. Perhaps you learned that your tears made others uncomfortable, that your anger was inappropriate, that your enthusiasm was too much. Slowly, carefully, you began to edit your authentic responses, creating an acceptable version of yourself that could navigate family dynamics, school environments, and social situations without causing the ripples that authentic feeling inevitably creates. The process is so gradual, so rewarded by external approval, that it can take decades to recognize how completely you have betrayed your own nature in service of fitting into spaces that were never designed to accommodate the full spectrum of human experience. You become an expert at reading rooms, sensing what version of yourself is wanted, adapting your emotional expression to match the comfort level of those around you. In professional environments, this mask reaches its most sophisticated development. The workplace becomes a theater where everyone performs emotional competence while hiding their humanity, where the ability to remain professional, which often means emotionally dishonest, is valued above integrity, authenticity, or genuine human connection. You learn to discuss your own life with the detachment of a news anchor reporting on distant events, to treat your deepest values as negotiable preferences, to smile while participating in systems that violate your soul. The mask teaches you to speak of your own needs in the language of weakness, to frame your desires as inconvenient interruptions to the smooth functioning of group dynamics, to apologize for taking up space with the inconvenient reality of your inner life. You become fluent in the dialect of emotional minimization. I'm fine, it's not a big deal. I'm probably just being too sensitive. Phrases that serve as incantations designed to make your authentic self disappear. Perhaps most tragically, the mask of indifference infiltrates your most intimate relationships, teaching you to hide your depths from the very people who might be capable of meeting them with understanding and acceptance. You learn to present edited versions of your experience even to partners, friends, and family members, maintaining the persona of having it all together while your authentic self withers from lack of recognition and nourishment. The mask becomes so sophisticated that it begins to fool even you. You start to believe that you have indeed transcended the need for deep emotional connection, that your apparent immunity to life's ups and downs represents genuine spiritual development, rather than psychological dissociation. You mistake numbness for peace, detachment for wisdom, the absence of feeling for the presence of enlightenment. But the shadow of this perfect indifference cannot be suppressed indefinitely. What you refuse to feel consciously begins to leak out in ways you cannot control. Sudden outbursts of rage that seem to come from nowhere, episodes of depression that descend without apparent cause, anxiety that grips you in moments when you should feel most secure. The mask may fool others, but the unconscious knows the truth of what has been banished from awareness. The body, too, becomes a repository for all the feeling that consciousness has learned to disown, the tension that never fully releases, the exhaustion that sleep cannot cure, the mysterious ailments that resist medical diagnosis. These often represent the physical manifestation of emotions that have been exiled from conscious experience. The mask of indifference creates not invulnerability, but a different kind of vulnerability, one that attacks from within rather than from without. You may have noticed how the mask affects your relationship to beauty, wonder, and joy, the very emotions that the culture of indifference fears most because they cannot be commodified or controlled. The capacity to be moved by a sunset, to be stirred by music, to be touched by acts of kindness, becomes increasingly rare as the mask hardens into a permanent feature of consciousness. What was once a tool for social navigation becomes a prison that separates you from the sources of vitality that make life meaningful. The persona of perfect indifference is particularly seductive because it promises protection from pain while delivering only protection from life itself. It suggests that if you can become sufficiently detached, sufficiently independent, sufficiently above it all, you will be safe from the inevitable suffering that accompanies genuine engagement with existence. But this safety comes at a price that only becomes apparent after years of living behind the mask, the gradual death of everything that makes you most essentially human. The mask teaches you to fear your own depths as signs of instability, to interpret your emotional responses as evidence of weakness rather than intelligence, to see your sensitivity as pathology rather than gift. It convinces you that the problem lies not in a world that demands emotional dishonesty, but in your own inability to adapt to that world's requirements. You begin to gaslight yourself, questioning the validity of your own emotional responses, dismissing your authentic reactions as overreactions. In intimate relationships, the mask creates a particularly cruel paradox. The very indifference that attracts others initially, the apparent self-sufficiency, the lack of neediness, the aura of emotional independence, eventually becomes the barrier that prevents genuine intimacy from developing. Partners find themselves relating to the mask rather than to you, loving a projection of strength and stability while never encountering the vulnerable, complex, authentic human being beneath the performance. You learn to have conversations about your feelings rather than from your feelings, to analyze your emotional life rather than live it, to perform intimacy rather than experience it. The mask becomes so convincing that even you begin to forget what lies beneath it, losing touch with the very authenticity that relationships require to move beyond surface connection into the depths where genuine love becomes possible. The spiritual community, too, has been infiltrated by this mask of perfect indifference, though here it wears the disguise of detachment, non-attachment, or transcendence. You encounter teachers and practitioners who speak eloquently about love and compassion, while remaining emotionally unavailable to the very people in their immediate environment. The mask appropriates spiritual language to justify emotional bypassing, using concepts like letting go or being present to avoid the challenging work of actually feeling what is alive in the depths of consciousness. This spiritual version of the mask is particularly dangerous because it provides seemingly noble justification for emotional disconnection. It suggests that enlightenment lies in rising above the messiness of human feeling rather than learning to work with it consciously. It promises peace through the elimination of desire rather than the integration of desire with wisdom. It offers transcendence through escape rather than transformation through embrace. Yet something in you rebels against this betrayal of your essential nature. Despite all the rewards that society offers for perfecting the mask of indifference, despite all the approval that comes from successfully hiding your depths, something deeper resists the complete erasure of your authentic self. This resistance may manifest as anxiety, depression, or a vague sense of meaninglessness, your psyche's way of signaling that you have strayed too far from the path of authentic being. The rebellion often begins subtly. Moments when the mask slips, an authentic feeling breaks through, instances when you find yourself moved despite your best efforts to remain unmoved, encounters with beauty or suffering that penetrate the carefully constructed barriers around your heart. These moments can feel like failures of control, evidence of your inability to maintain the persona of perfect indifference that the world seems to demand. But they are actually invitations, calls from your deeper nature, to remember who you were before you learned to hide, to reclaim the emotional authenticity that the mask has been systematically suppressing. They represent the return of the repressed, the uprising of the banished aspects of your nature that refuse to remain forever in exile from consciousness. The mask of perfect indifference is not your enemy. It has served as protection in environments where authentic feeling was not safe, where vulnerability was met with exploitation, where sensitivity was punished rather than honored. But what served as necessary protection in one phase of life can become unnecessary imprisonment in another. The mask that once preserved your ability to survive can eventually prevent your capacity to thrive. Recognizing the mask is the first step in developing a conscious relationship with it, rather than being unconsciously controlled by it. You begin to notice when you are performing, rather than being, when you are hiding, rather than revealing, when you are protecting rather than connecting. This awareness creates the possibility of choice, moments when you can decide whether the mask is truly necessary or whether it has simply become a habit that no longer serves your authentic development. The fear, of course, is that without the mask you will be overwhelmed by feeling, consumed by emotion, rendered unable to function in a world that seems to require emotional dishonesty for basic survival. But this fear often proves to be as much illusion as the mask itself. The alternative to perfect indifference is not emotional chaos, but emotional intelligence, the capacity to feel fully without being overwhelmed, to be moved without being destroyed, to remain open without losing your center. Your journey toward authentic being requires not the elimination of the persona, but its conscious integration, learning when the mask serves genuine protection and when it serves only the illusion of safety, while preventing real connection. This is delicate work that cannot be rushed, for the mask often conceals not only strength, but also wounds that require gentle attention before they can be safely revealed. The path forward involves developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between persona and authenticity, between social adaptation and genuine expression, between the need to belong and the need to be true to your essential nature. This is not a problem to be solved, but a dynamic to be navigated consciously throughout life. As you begin to question the necessity of perfect indifference, you may discover that your emotional sensitivity, rather than being the weakness you were taught to hide, is actually your greatest strength. Your capacity to read the subtle currents of experience, to respond appropriately to the actual rather than the apparent, to connect authentically with others who are also longing to remove their masks and meet in the space of genuine human encounter. The world needs what you have been taught to hide: your tears, your anger, your joy, your vulnerability. These are not signs of your failure to adapt to a dysfunctional system, but evidence of your refusal to be diminished by it. Your sensitivity is not pathology but intelligence, not weakness, but the very strength needed to navigate the complex emotional landscape of authentic human relationship. The mask of perfect indifference promises safety, but delivers isolation, promises strength, but creates brittleness, promises freedom but constructs prison walls around the very essence of who you are. Your authentic feeling, chaotic and inconvenient as it may sometimes be, connects you to the source of vitality that makes life worth living. The choice between mask and authenticity is ultimately the choice between existing and living, between surviving and thriving, between the death in life of perfect control and the alive uncertainty of genuine being. In the depths beneath the mask, your authentic self waits patiently for recognition, for permission to exist without apology, for the courage to remove the costume that has concealed your essential nature for far too long. This deeper self knows something the mask has forgotten, that true invulnerability comes not from feeling nothing but from the capacity to feel everything and remain whole, not from needing nothing but from the ability to receive what is offered with grace, and to give what is needed with generosity. The persona of perfect indifference is cracking, and through the cracks, light is beginning to shine, the light of your authentic feeling, your genuine responsiveness, your irreplaceable contribution to the healing of a world that has forgotten how to feel. The mask has served its purpose. Now it is time to discover what lies beneath it, to reclaim the emotional authenticity that is your birthright, to step into the fullness of who you were always meant to be. What happens to the emotions that are deemed unacceptable by the tyranny of social conditioning? Where do the tears go when they are swallowed rather than shed? The rage when it is pushed down rather than expressed? The grief when it is denied rather than honored? Jung understood what most have forgotten, that nothing in the psyche ever truly disappears. What consciousness refuses to acknowledge does not vanish, but transforms, descending into the shadow realm of the unconscious, where it takes on a life of its own, growing in the darkness like seeds planted in rich, fertile soil. You have lived this truth in ways both subtle and dramatic, though you may not have recognized the connection between your careful suppression of authentic feeling and the mysterious symptoms that seem to arise from nowhere, the sudden explosions of inexplicable anger, the waves of depression that descend without apparent cause, the anxiety that grips you in moments when you should feel most secure. These are not random malfunctions of consciousness, but the precise return of what you have banished from awareness, emotions that have been exiled to the shadow where they ferment, intensify, and eventually demand recognition through increasingly dramatic manifestations. The shadow of suppressed feeling is not some abstract psychological concept, but a living reality that operates with autonomous power in the depths of your psyche. every emotion you have been taught to disown, every authentic response you have learned to edit, every genuine feeling you have sacrificed on the altar of social acceptability has not disappeared, but has joined the growing collection of banished aspects of your nature that now live in the unconscious, influencing your thoughts, behaviors, and even your physical health from their exile in the darkness. Jung spoke of complexes, autonomous portions of the psyche that operate outside of conscious control, carrying their own emotional charge and agenda. The shadow of suppressed feeling is such a complex, a coherent psychological entity that has been formed from all the emotions you have been taught to fear, deny, or transcend. It possesses its own intelligence, its own will, and its own methods for making its presence known when it has been ignored for too long. Consider how your body has become the repository for all the feeling that your mind has learned to disown. The chronic tension in your shoulders may carry the weight of anger you have never allowed yourself to express. The persistent ache in your chest might house the grief you have been told to get over before its natural process could complete. The digestive issues that resist medical treatment could represent the fear you have swallowed rather than faced, the anxiety you have internalized rather than acknowledged. The shadow does not respect the neat boundaries that consciousness tries to maintain between acceptable and unacceptable feeling. What you refuse to feel consciously begins to feel you, taking possession of your responses in moments when your careful control slips, erupting through the cracks in your perfectly maintained persona with an intensity that both surprises and terrifies you. You become a stranger to yourself, acting in ways that seem completely foreign to the image you maintain of who you are. Perhaps you recognize the experience of being triggered moments when a seemingly minor event provokes a response so disproportionate to the immediate circumstances that you find yourself apologizing, explaining, or wondering where such intensity could have come from. These eruptions are often the shadow's way of delivering accumulated emotional content that has been building pressure in the unconscious, waiting for any opportunity to break through into awareness. The shadow of suppressed feeling operates through projection as well, causing you to see in others the very emotions you have disowned in yourself. The person whose anger you find most intolerable may be carrying the mirror image of rage you have never allowed yourself to express. The individual whose sadness makes you most uncomfortable might be reflecting back the grief you have been taught to suppress. The one whose joy irritates you beyond all reasonable proportion could be showing you the spontaneous aliveness you have sacrificed to maintain social acceptability. This projective mechanism creates a world of emotional refugees, people who are constantly triggered by encountering in others what they have banished in themselves, unable to recognize that their strongest reactions often point directly toward their own disowned content. The shadow ensures that what you refuse to face internally will be presented to you externally, again and again, until you develop the courage to reclaim what you have cast out of consciousness. Jung understood that the shadow is not evil but simply unconscious, not malevolent but merely unintegrated. The emotions that live in your personal shadow are not inherently destructive. They become destructive only when they are forced to operate outside of conscious relationship, when they are denied the light of awareness that could transform them from autonomous complexes into integrated aspects of your complete personality. Your anger, for instance, when it lives in the shadow, may express itself as passive aggression, chronic resentment, or sudden explosions that damage relationships and leave you feeling ashamed of your loss of control. But when anger is brought into conscious relationship, it reveals itself as a healthy response to boundary violations, a source of energy for necessary change, a signal that something in your environment requires attention or transformation. Your sadness, when banished to the shadow, may manifest as depression, chronic fatigue, or a persistent sense of meaninglessness that seems to have no identifiable cause. But when grief is allowed to move through consciousness naturally, it reveals itself as love with nowhere to go, as the natural response to loss that honors what was precious, as the emotion that connects you most deeply to the value of what matters most in life. Your fear, when it operates from the shadow, may control your choices from the darkness of the unconscious, limiting your possibilities, keeping you small, preventing you from taking the risks necessary for authentic growth. But when fear is acknowledged consciously, It transforms into appropriate caution, wise discernment, and the healthy respect for danger that keeps you safe, while still allowing you to engage fully with life's adventures. The shadow of suppressed feeling creates what Jung recognized as neurosis, the splitting of the psyche into acceptable and unacceptable parts, conscious and unconscious aspects, persona and shadow elements that remain in constant conflict rather than integrated synthesis. This internal war consumes enormous amounts of psychic energy, leaving you feeling exhausted, not by what you are doing but by what you are constantly trying not to feel, not to know, not to acknowledge about your own inner reality. You may have noticed how much effort it takes to maintain emotional suppression, the constant vigilance required to monitor your responses, edit your authentic reactions, and present only those aspects of yourself that meet social approval. This is the energy that could otherwise be available for creativity, connection, and the genuine engagement with life that makes existence meaningful. The shadow of suppressed feeling is not just emotionally costly, but energetically expensive, depleting your vitality in service of maintaining an image that was never truly you. The physical manifestations of suppressed feeling often puzzle medical professionals who are trained to treat symptoms without investigating their emotional origins. The autoimmune conditions that represent the body attacking itself may mirror the psyche's internal war against its own authentic nature. The chronic pain syndromes that resist treatment may carry the unexpressed anguish of a soul forced to betray its deepest truth. The digestive disorders, sleep disturbances, and mysterious ailments that plague modern life often represent the body's attempt to process emotions that consciousness has refused to acknowledge. Jung observed that what is not brought to consciousness appears in life as fate, the mysterious way that unprocessed psychological content manifests as external events, relationship patterns, and life circumstances that seem to happen to you, but actually arise from within you. The shadow of suppressed feeling does not remain contained within individual psychology but leaks out into your relationships, your choices, and the very fabric of your experienced reality. You may find yourself repeatedly attracted to partners who express the very emotions you have disowned, unconsciously seeking completion through relationships with people who carry your projected shadow content, or you may discover patterns of avoiding, rejecting, or trying to fix others who trigger recognition of your own suppressed feelings. The shadow ensures that what you refuse to face internally will be presented to you externally, through the mirror of relationship, until you develop the courage to reclaim what belongs to you. The workplace becomes another theater where the shadow of suppressed feeling plays out its unconscious dramas. The colleague who irritates you beyond all reasonable proportion may be carrying aspects of your own personality that you have learned to hide. The boss whose emotional style triggers your strongest reactions might be reflecting back the authority issues you have never fully resolved. The work environments that feel most toxic may be externally manifesting the internal toxicity created by your own emotional suppression. Like Chiron, the mythological centaur, whose divine wound would never heal, you stand at the threshold between worlds, part human, part something more, carrying within your very being the sacred injury that marks you as one chosen for a particular kind of service to consciousness itself. Your emotional wounds are not accidents of an uncaring universe, but the precise marks of initiation, the sacred scarring that prepares you to serve as a bridge between the realm of suffering and the possibility of transformation that lies hidden within it. The wounded healer archetype speaks to something ancient and essential in human experience, the understanding that those who guide others through darkness must first have navigated those territories themselves. That true healing wisdom cannot be learned from books or theories, but only through the direct, intimate encounter with one's own deepest wounds. Your emotional sensitivity, your tendency to feel everything so intensely that it threatens to overwhelm you, is not pathology but preparation, not curse but calling, not weakness but the very quality that qualifies you for the sacred work of transmuting suffering into wisdom. But first, you must descend. Not the comfortable, controlled descent of therapeutic processing or spiritual bypassing, but the terrifying free fall into the underworld of your own psyche, where all the emotions you have been taught to avoid wait in their primal, unedited intensity. This is the voluntary descent into madness that every shamanic tradition recognizes as necessary for those called to heal, the deliberate dismemberment of the false self, so that something more authentic can be born from its ashes. The descent begins not when you choose it, but when life chooses it for you, through the breakdown, the loss, the betrayal, the crisis that strips away your carefully constructed defenses and leaves you naked before the raw forces of existence. Perhaps it comes through the ending of a relationship that you believed defined you, the loss of a role or identity that gave your life meaning, the failure of dreams you had invested with all your hope for the future. Or perhaps it arrives more subtly, as a growing emptiness, a persistent meaninglessness, a sense that the life you have been living is not truly yours but a performance you have been giving for an audience that will never be satisfied. The descent demands that you abandon the safety of numbness, the comfort of denial, the refuge of staying busy enough to avoid feeling deeply. It requires you to stop, to turn inward, to face the emotional underworld that most spend their entire lives trying to escape. This is not the gentle, supported exploration offered by conventional therapy, but the raw, unmediated encounter with everything you have spent years trying not to feel, the grief that has been accumulating since childhood, the rage that has been simmering beneath the surface of politeness, the terror that lurks beneath your competent facade, the despair that whispers of the meaninglessness that seems to infect everything you touch. In the mythological traditions, the descent into the underworld is always a journey to the realm of the dead. Not literally, but psychologically. You must die to who you thought you were, to the identity you have been maintaining, to the story you have been telling yourself about your life and its meaning. This death is not metaphorical but absolutely real on the psychological level. The person you were before the descent cannot survive the encounter with the depths. Something in you must actually die so that something else can be born. The underworld has its own rules, its own logic, its own requirements for safe passage. The rational mind, with its need for control and understanding, becomes not an ally, but an obstacle. The coping mechanisms that served you in the upper world, analysis, planning, positive thinking, spiritual bypassing, prove useless in the face of the raw primal forces that rule the depths. You must learn to navigate by different stars, to trust in capacities you didn't know you possessed, to find your way through territories that cannot be mapped by ordinary consciousness. Here, in the depths of your own emotional underworld, you encounter the full force of everything you have been avoiding. The grief reveals itself as an ocean, vast and seemingly endless, carrying not only your own losses but the accumulated sorrow of generations. The anger burns with the heat of solar fire, consuming not just your personal injustices, but the rage of everyone who has ever been silenced, dismissed, or forced to betray their authentic nature. The fear takes on the dimensions of cosmic terror, encompassing not just your individual anxieties, but the existential dread that accompanies conscious awareness of mortality, meaninglessness, and the apparent indifference of the universe. Yet something extraordinary begins to happen in this place of ultimate vulnerability. Stripped of your defenses, your personas, your carefully maintained control, you discover resources you never knew existed. The very emotions that seemed like enemies when experienced from the surface reveal themselves as allies when met with complete acceptance. The grief that threatened to drown you becomes a cleansing ocean that washes away everything false and leaves only what is essential. The anger that seemed so dangerous transforms into sacred fire that burns away illusion and illuminates what truly matters. The fear that paralyzed you becomes the edge of aliveness, the sharp awareness that makes every moment precious because it could be the last. This is the alchemical mystery that every wounded healer must discover, that the very wounds that seem to disqualify you from healing are actually what qualify you for it. The pain you have carried becomes the source of your compassion. The darkness you have navigated becomes the light you offer to others lost in similar territories. The breakdown that seemed like ending becomes the breakthrough that opens new possibilities for being. But the descent is not a one-time event completed and left behind. The wounded healer, archetype requires ongoing relationship with woundedness, continuous willingness to return to the depths when life calls you there, perpetual openness to the dismemberment and reconstitution that keeps you connected to the source of healing wisdom. Unlike the heroic archetype that conquers and moves on, the wounded healer remains in eternal dialogue with suffering, finding in that dialogue the ever-renewing source of capacity to serve others who are struggling with similar wounds. The myth of Chiron tells us that his wound came from a misdirected arrow, an accident that could have happened to anyone but that marked him specifically for his unique service to consciousness. Your emotional wounds may also feel like accidents, the result of difficult childhoods, traumatic relationships, or simply the misfortune of being born sensitive in a world that rewards numbness. But the myth suggests a deeper purpose, a hidden intelligence that uses apparent accidents to create the specific kinds of wounding that prepare particular individuals for particular kinds of service. Your hypersensitivity to emotional pain may be the precise quality needed to guide others through territories of feeling that less sensitive people cannot even perceive. Your tendency to absorb the emotions of others may be preparation for the kind of empathic healing that can only be offered by someone who knows intimately what it feels like to carry burdens that are not their own. Your inability to find comfort in the superficial solutions that satisfy others may be what qualifies you to offer real solutions to people who are ready for depth rather than distraction. The wounded healer does not heal by eliminating their wounds, but by transforming their relationship to wounding itself. The pain does not disappear but becomes conscious, purposeful, integrated into a larger understanding of the role that suffering plays in the evolution of consciousness. You learn to carry your wounds not as badges of victimhood, but as credentials of depth, not as evidence of your brokenness, but as proof of your capacity to remain open to life, even when life includes experiences that would tempt others to close down completely. This transformation requires developing what the alchemists called the philosophical Mercurius, a consciousness that can hold paradox without resolving it, that can remain stable while containing apparently contradictory truths. You must learn to be simultaneously wounded and healed, broken and whole, suffering and peaceful, human and divine. This is not a comfortable state of being, but it is a powerful one, for it connects you to the deepest currents of existence where all apparent opposites reveal their hidden unity. The descent into your emotional underworld is also a descent into the collective unconscious, that realm where individual psychology connects to the shared human experience of suffering, healing, and transformation. Your personal wounds become doorways into universal patterns of wounding and healing. Your individual journey through darkness becomes part of the eternal human story of death and rebirth, descent and return, losing oneself to find oneself on a deeper level. In the depths, you encounter not only your personal shadow, but the cultural shadow, the collective wounds that your individual sensitivity has been registering all along. The depression you have carried may be connected to the collective grief over what has been lost in the rush toward progress. The anxiety that has plagued you might be picking up the species-wide terror of meaninglessness that accompanies the death of traditional sources of significance. The rage that you have struggled to contain could be carrying the collective anger of everyone who has been forced to betray their authentic nature in service of systems that serve profit over people. This recognition begins to shift your relationship to your own emotional intensity from personal pathology to impersonal service. You are not suffering from your own individual dysfunction, but serving as a receiver for collective content that needs to be processed, integrated, and transformed. Your emotional wounds become not evidence of your failure to adapt, but proof of your refusal to participate in collective numbing, your willingness to remain open to the full spectrum of human experience, even when that openness brings pain. The wounded healer archetype appears in every culture because it addresses a universal need, the requirement for guides who can navigate territories of suffering and emerge with wisdom rather than bitterness, transformation rather than trauma, integration rather than fragmentation. These figures serve as living proof that the darkest experiences can be alchemized into sources of light, that the most devastating wounds can become sources of the deepest healing, that what seems like curse can reveal itself as gift when approached with the right understanding. Your descent into the emotional underworld is not regression but progression, not breakdown but breakthrough, not pathology but initiation into mysteries that can only be learned through direct experience. The territories you explore in your journey through personal darkness are the same territories that others will need to navigate in their own healing journeys. Every step you take into conscious relationship with your wounds creates new pathways that others can follow, new maps of territories that were previously uncharted. The wounded healer does not heal others by giving advice or offering techniques, but by embodying the possibility of transformation, by demonstrating through their very being that it is possible to carry wounds consciously rather than unconsciously, to remain open to feeling without being destroyed by feeling, to find meaning in suffering without romanticizing suffering itself. Your presence becomes the medicine, your integrated woundedness the healing force that helps others believe that their own journey through darkness can lead to light. But this service comes with ongoing requirements. The wounded healer cannot retire from relationship with wounding, cannot graduate from vulnerability, cannot achieve a state of permanent healing that eliminates the need for continued descent. Life will continue to offer opportunities for dismemberment and reconstitution, for dying and being reborn, for losing yourself and finding yourself on ever deeper levels. Each descent brings new dimensions of wounding and new possibilities for healing, new deaths and new births, new ways of understanding what it means to be simultaneously mortal and eternal, broken and whole. The path of the wounded healer is not for everyone. It requires a particular constitution, a specific calling, a willingness to remain in ongoing relationship with what most would prefer to heal once and leave behind. But for those called to this path, there is no alternative that honors the depth of their nature, no other way of being that makes use of their sensitivity as service, rather than seeing it as pathology to be cured. Your emotional wounds are not obstacles to your destiny, but the very means by which your destiny unfolds. The healing you seek is not the elimination of wounding, but the transformation of unconscious wounding into conscious service, not the escape from suffering, but the alchemical transmutation of suffering into wisdom, compassion, and the capacity to guide others through their own necessary descents into the territories where healing becomes possible. The descent continues, not as endless falling but as ongoing deepening, not as perpetual suffering but as continuous initiation into the mysteries that can only be learned through intimate relationship with the full spectrum of human experience. Each journey into the underworld brings you back with new treasures, not gold or jewels but insights, capacities and qualities of being that can only be forged in the fires of conscious suffering and conscious healing. You are being prepared for service of a particular kind, not the service of those who heal from a safe distance, but the service of those who heal by remaining present in the very territories where healing is needed most. Your wounds are your credentials, your sensitivity your qualification, your willingness to descend again and again, your commitment to the sacred work of serving as a bridge between darkness and light, between suffering and transformation, between the broken world that is and the healed world that becomes possible when consciousness learns to work consciously with its own wounding. The wounded healer's descent is never complete, because the need for healing is never complete, because new forms of wounding continue to emerge in the ongoing evolution of consciousness, because each generation requires guides who have learned to navigate the specific territories of darkness that characterize their particular moment in history. Your descent is part of a lineage, a tradition, an ongoing service to the collective healing that consciousness itself requires to continue evolving toward greater wholeness, integration, and authentic aliveness. The path descends deeper still, but you no longer walk it alone. You carry with you the wisdom of all who have made this journey before, and you prepare the way for all who will follow. Your wounds become gifts, not just to your own healing but to the healing of the world itself. For in learning to heal consciously you become part of the healing that consciousness offers to itself through those willing to serve as instruments of its own deepest transformation. Even your creative expressions and career choices may be influenced by the shadow's attempt to find indirect outlets for suppressed feeling. The perfectionism that prevents you from completing projects may represent terror of criticism disguised as high standards. The procrastination that sabotages your goals might carry the rebellion against authority that you have never allowed yourself to express directly. The chronic dissatisfaction with your achievements could reflect the grief over dreams you abandoned to meet others' expectations. The shadow of suppressed feeling does not operate only in dramatic, obvious ways. Much of its influence is subtle, persistent, and woven so deeply into the fabric of your daily experience that you may not recognize its presence. The chronic, low-level anxiety that has become your normal state might represent accumulated fear that has never been consciously processed. The persistent sadness that colors your perception of life could be carrying unexpressed grief from losses you were never allowed to mourn properly. The shadow also manifests through what you do not feel when feeling would be appropriate, the numbness when you should be angry, the inability to cry when grief is called for, the absence of joy in situations that should bring happiness. This emotional flatness is not the absence of feeling, but feeling that has been so thoroughly suppressed that it can no longer reach conscious awareness. The emotions are still there, still influencing behavior from the unconscious, but they have been buried so deeply that they seem to have disappeared entirely. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, requires the integration of shadow content rather than its elimination. The emotions you have been taught to fear and suppress are not enemies to be defeated, but allies to be reclaimed, not obstacles to transcendence, but ingredients necessary for psychological completion. The shadow of suppressed feeling carries not only your disowned pain, but also your banished vitality, not only your rejected weakness, but also your exiled strength. The process of shadow integration is not comfortable. It requires acknowledging aspects of yourself that you have spent years trying to deny, feeling emotions that you have been taught to avoid, and owning parts of your personality that seem incompatible with the image you have maintained. But this discomfort is the price of wholeness, the labor pains of psychological rebirth, the necessary chaos that precedes a more integrated way of being. As you begin to recognize the shadow of suppressed feeling operating in your life, you may feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you have disowned, the accumulated emotional content that has been building pressure in the unconscious. This recognition can initially increase rather than decrease the symptoms as previously unconscious material begins to surface. But this is not regression, but progression. The first stage of bringing what has been hidden into the light of consciousness, where it can be transformed. The shadow does not disappear through integration but becomes conscious, changing from an autonomous complex that controls behavior from the darkness into a known aspect of personality that can be worked with deliberately. Your anger, when integrated, becomes available as a resource for healthy boundary setting and necessary change. Your grief, when welcomed, deepens your capacity for love and connection. Your fear, when acknowledged, transforms into appropriate caution and wise discernment. The emotions that have lived in your shadow are not foreign invaders, but exiled aspects of your own nature that have been waiting patiently in the darkness for permission to return home to consciousness. They carry not only the pain of suppression, but also the vitality that was banished along with them, not only the chaos of unprocessed feeling, but also the creativity and aliveness that are their hidden gifts. Your task is not to eliminate the shadow of suppressed feeling, but to develop a conscious relationship with it, to learn its language, understand its messages, and gradually reclaim the emotional territory that was ceded to the unconscious through years of suppression and denial. This is delicate work that cannot be rushed, for the shadow has its own timeline and its own requirements for safe emergence into awareness. The shadow of suppressed feeling is both your burden and your treasure, both your wound and your gift, both the problem to be solved and the solution waiting to be discovered. In its dark depths lie not only the emotions you have been taught to fear, but also the very qualities that make you most essentially human. The capacity for deep feeling, authentic response, and the kind of emotional intelligence that can only be developed through direct, conscious relationship with the full spectrum of your inner experience. The integration of this shadow is not a luxury but a necessity, not optional self-improvement but essential healing for both individual and collective consciousness. For as long as the shadow of suppressed feeling continues to operate autonomously in the darkness, it will continue to manifest as symptom, projection, and unconscious behavior that perpetuates the very problems it seeks to escape. Only through conscious relationship with what has been banished can you reclaim the wholeness that is your birthright and step into the fullness of authentic being. In the mythic landscape of your inner world, there exists a figure both divine and tormented, wise and wounded, healing and hurt. This is Chiron, the centaur, whose story becomes your story, whose wound becomes your gateway to wisdom. Like him, you stand at the threshold between worlds, part human, part something greater, carrying within your flesh the very injury that will become your most sacred gift. The descent begins not with choice but with recognition. You have been living perhaps for years with a wound that will not heal, a pain that conventional remedies cannot touch, an emotional injury so deep that it has become the organizing principle around which your entire life revolves. This is not the sharp, clean cut of physical trauma that mends with time and proper care. This is the existential wound, the soul injury, the psychological tear in the fabric of your being that conventional wisdom tells you to ignore, medicate, or simply endure. Yet tonight, in this sacred moment of recognition, you begin to understand that your wound is not your weakness. It is your calling. The very sensitivity that makes you suffer is the same sensitivity that will enable you to heal. The emotional depths that threaten to drown you are the same depths from which wisdom springs. The pain that isolates you from the shallow celebrations of surface life is the same pain that connects you to the profound mysteries of human existence. The wounded healer's path requires a fundamental shift in perspective, a revolution of consciousness so complete that it transforms your relationship not just to your own suffering, but to suffering itself. Where once you saw pathology, you begin to recognize sacred process. Where once you experienced only overwhelming darkness, you start to perceive the luminous potential hidden within that darkness. This is not positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. This is the deep recognition that your wound carries within it the very medicine the world needs. To begin this descent, you must first acknowledge the profound courage it takes to feel in a world that has forgotten how to feel. Your emotional intensity is not a sign of weakness or instability. It is evidence of a soul that refuses to be numbed, a heart that will not close despite repeated injury, a consciousness that insists on remaining open to the full spectrum of human experience. In a culture that medicates sadness, pathologizes sensitivity, and treats emotional depth as dysfunction, your very existence as a feeling being becomes a revolutionary act. The mythological Chiron was wounded by an arrow dipped in the Hydra's poisonous blood, shot accidentally by his beloved student Heracles. The wound would never heal, yet from this eternal injury came Chiron's greatest gift, his ability to understand and heal the wounds of others. His pain became his portal to wisdom, his suffering transformed into service. In your own life you may recognize a similar pattern. The very experiences that have caused you the deepest pain are often the ones that enable you to connect most profoundly with others in their suffering. But before this transformation can occur, you must make the conscious choice to descend. This is not the passive falling into depression or the unconscious drowning in emotion that marks so much modern suffering. This is the deliberate, sacred descent of the initiated, the voluntary journey into the underworld of your own psyche, undertaken not from despair but from a growing understanding that your wound contains your wisdom, your breakdown holds your breakthrough, your darkness conceals your light. The descent begins with the recognition that everything you have been taught about handling difficult emotions may be precisely backwards. Instead of rising above your pain, you must go deeper into it. Instead of transcending your suffering, you must inhabit it fully. Instead of healing your wound in the conventional sense of making it disappear, you must learn to live with it, so consciously that it becomes a source of ongoing revelation and renewal. This requires a quality of courage that our culture rarely acknowledges or supports. It is not the courage of the warrior charging into battle, but the courage of the mystic entering the cave of their own heart. It is not the bravery of action, but the bravery of receptivity, not the strength of resistance, but the strength of surrender. You must become willing to feel everything you have been taught to avoid. The grief that threatens to dissolve you, the rage that could consume you, the terror that might shatter you, the despair that seems to offer no hope of redemption. Yet, this willingness to descend is not masochistic or self-destructive. It is based on a profound trust in the wisdom of the psyche, a deep faith in the transformative power of consciousness, an unwavering belief that what appears to be leading you toward destruction is actually guiding you toward renewal. The wounded healer understands that the path through suffering is not around it or over it, but directly into its very heart, where the seeds of healing lie waiting to be discovered. As you begin this descent, you may find that your relationship to time itself begins to change. The urgent need for immediate relief, for quick fixes and rapid solutions, gives way to a deeper understanding of psychological and spiritual timing. Healing happens not according to your ego's schedule, but according to the soul's rhythm, not in linear progression, but in spirals and cycles, not through force, but through patience, attention, and love. The wound that calls you into this descent may be personal in its origins: childhood trauma, relationship betrayals, career disappointments, health crises, losses of every kind. Yet as you descend more deeply, you begin to recognize that your personal wound is connected to larger patterns, collective injuries, archetypal themes that have echoed through human consciousness for millennia. Your individual suffering becomes a doorway into the universal human condition. Your private pain transforms into compassion and understanding for all beings who suffer. In the depths of this descent, you encounter what Jung called the shadow, not just your personal shadow, but the cultural shadow, the collective repressed emotions and experiences that your hypersensitivity makes you particularly attuned to. You begin to understand that your emotional overwhelm may not be entirely personal, but may represent your psyche's attempt to process not just your own unexpressed feelings, but the unexpressed feelings of your family system, your community, your entire culture. This recognition brings both burden and liberation. The burden of understanding that you may be carrying emotional material that belongs not just to you, but to the collective. The liberation of recognizing that your sensitivity serves a larger purpose, that your capacity to feel deeply makes you a kind of emotional lightning rod for energies that need to be processed and transformed in the world. The wounded healer's descent requires you to develop a new relationship with pain itself. Instead of viewing pain as something to be eliminated as quickly as possible, you begin to approach it with the curiosity of a scientist, the reverence of a mystic, the patience of a gardener tending slowly growing seeds. You learn to ask not how can I make this stop, but what is this trying to teach me? What transformation is this pain attempting to catalyze? What aspect of my false self is this suffering trying to dissolve? This shift in relationship to pain is perhaps the most radical aspect of the wounded healer's path. It requires you to trust that your psyche is fundamentally oriented toward healing and wholeness, even when its methods seem destructive or counterproductive. It demands that you have faith in the intelligence of your symptoms, the wisdom of your suffering, the purposeness of your emotional upheaval. As you descend more deeply, you may begin to recognize patterns in your pain, rhythms in your suffering, cycles of death and rebirth that repeat with the regularity of seasons. You start to understand that what you have been experiencing as random emotional chaos is actually the ordered unfolding of a deeper process, the systematic dismantling of psychological structures that no longer serve your authentic development. The descent reveals that much of what you have called depression may actually be the psyche's way of slowing you down, forcing you to turn inward, compelling you to question the assumptions and values that have been driving your life. What you have labeled as anxiety may be your soul's alarm system, alerting you to the dangers of living inauthentically, warning you when you stray too far from your true path. What you have diagnosed as emotional instability may be the natural fluctuation of a sensitive system responding appropriately to an unstable world. In the depths of this journey, you encounter the profound loneliness that comes with being in a world that has forgotten how to feel. This loneliness is not just personal but existential. The isolation of consciousness that recognizes beauty in a world obsessed with utility, that perceives meaning in a culture devoted to materialism, that insists on depth in a society committed to surface. Yet within this loneliness lies a strange companionship, the recognition that you are not alone in your aloneness, that there are others on this same path of descent, other wounded healers learning to transform their sensitivity from burden into gift. You begin to understand that your wound connects you to a lineage of wisdom keepers, a tradition of those who have learned to alchemize suffering into service, pain into compassion, breakdown into breakthrough. The descent of the wounded healer is not a journey you take once and complete. It is a way of life, a commitment to ongoing depth, a willingness to continue descending whenever life calls you deeper. It is the recognition that your wound will never completely heal in the conventional sense, but will instead become a perpetual source of renewal, a constantly flowing spring of wisdom and compassion. As you learn to inhabit this descent consciously, you begin to develop what might be called sacred relationship to your own suffering. You no longer fight your pain but learn to listen to it, no longer judge your emotional intensity but begin to honor it, no longer try to fix your sensitivity but start to cultivate it as a spiritual practice. This transformation in your relationship to suffering begins to affect every aspect of your life. Your capacity to be with your own pain increases your ability to be present with others in theirs. Your willingness to face your own darkness develops your courage to accompany others through their shadow encounters. Your experience of finding meaning in your own suffering gives you the wisdom to help others discover purpose in their pain. The wounded healer emerges not as one who has overcome suffering, but as one who has learned to suffer consciously, not as someone who has eliminated pain, but as someone who has transformed their relationship to pain so completely that it becomes a source of ongoing wisdom and renewal. You become a living demonstration that wounds, when approached with consciousness and courage, become wells of compassion, that sensitivity, when cultivated rather than medicated, becomes a form of spiritual service. In this descent, you discover that the very qualities that make you vulnerable also make you valuable, that the same depth of feeling that causes you pain also enables you to touch others at levels where superficial comfort cannot reach. You begin to understand that your wound is not something to be ashamed of or hidden, but something to be honored and shared, not a sign of your brokenness but evidence of your wholeness. The wounded healer's descent reveals that healing is not about returning to some imagined state of perfect health or emotional stability. True healing is about integrating your wound so completely into your identity that it becomes a source of strength rather than weakness, wisdom rather than confusion, connection rather than isolation. It is about learning to carry your injury so consciously that it becomes a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. As you continue this sacred descent, you may begin to notice that your relationship to the world around you starts to shift. Colors may seem more vivid, emotions more nuanced, connections more profound. Your wound, instead of cutting you off from life, begins to open you more deeply to it. Your sensitivity, instead of making you fragile, reveals itself as a form of spiritual strength. Your pain, instead of diminishing you, starts to enlarge your capacity for both suffering and joy. This is the mystery and the promise of the wounded healer's path, that in choosing to descend consciously into your deepest wound, you discover not destruction but renewal, not death but rebirth, not the end of your story but its most profound beginning. Your wound becomes your wisdom, your sensitivity becomes your strength, your descent becomes your ascent into a life of unprecedented depth, meaning and service. The journey continues, the descent deepens, and with each step into the darkness, you carry more light, not the artificial brightness of denial or spiritual bypassing, but the authentic illumination that comes only from those brave enough to find the gold hidden in the depths of their own shadow, the wisdom concealed in the heart of their wound, the healer emerging from the ashes of their own healing. In the ancient laboratories of transformation, where base metals were transmuted into gold and the mysteries of matter revealed their deepest secrets, the alchemists understood what modern psychology has forgotten: that darkness is not the enemy of light, but its pregnant possibility; that breakdown is not the opposite of breakthrough, but its necessary precursor; that the very experiences we most desperately seek to avoid may contain the keys to the transformation we most deeply desire. The nigredo, the blackening phase of the alchemical opus, represents far more than simple destruction. It is the sacred dissolution that must occur before any genuine renewal can take place, the conscious decomposition of false structures that have imprisoned the authentic self, the deliberate embrace of what appears to be psychological death in service of genuine rebirth. In your own life, this phase may be manifesting as the very emotional darkness that therapists seek to medicate away, the depression that well-meaning friends encourage you to snap out of, the overwhelming feelings that society labels as dysfunction. Yet, what if these experiences of darkness are not pathological but purposeful? What if your depression is not a disease to be cured, but a sacred process to be honored? What if your anxiety is not a disorder to be eliminated, but a messenger carrying vital information about the state of your soul? What if your emotional overwhelm is not evidence of your weakness, but proof of your psyche's refusal to accept the deadening compromises that pass for normal life in a world that has lost touch with its own depths? The alchemical understanding of nigredo invites you to consider a radical possibility: that your darkest psychological experiences may be your soul's attempt to break down the artificial structures that have been constraining your authentic development. Like the alchemist who deliberately subjects base materials to processes of dissolution and putrefaction, your psyche may be subjecting your false identity to necessary destruction, clearing away the psychological debris that has accumulated around your true nature. This perspective requires a fundamental shift in how you understand emotional suffering. Instead of viewing your dark experiences as evidence that something is wrong with you, you begin to recognize them as evidence that something is right with you, that your soul is still alive enough to rebel against conditions that would deaden it, still sensitive enough to respond to environments that would numb it, still whole enough to resist the fragmentation that modern life demands. The nigredo phase often begins with what feels like a complete loss of meaning. The goals that once motivated you seem suddenly empty. The relationships that once sustained you feel hollow. The achievements that once defined you appear meaningless. This dissolution of external identifications can be terrifying, as it seems to leave you with nothing solid to hold on to, no clear sense of who you are or why you exist. Yet, from the alchemical perspective, this dissolution is not destruction, but preparation. The false structures of identity that are dissolving were never truly you to begin with. They were adaptations, accommodations, personas developed to help you survive in environments that could not accommodate your authentic nature. Their dissolution, however painful, creates the space for something more genuine to emerge. In the depths of nigredo, you may experience what feels like a complete breakdown of your normal psychological functioning. Sleep patterns disrupted, concentration scattered, emotions swinging between numbness and overwhelming intensity. These symptoms, which modern psychiatry would likely label as major depression or anxiety disorder, represent from the alchemical viewpoint the natural chaos that emerges when rigid psychological structures begin to dissolve. This understanding does not minimize the very real suffering involved in such experiences. The nigredo is genuinely difficult, genuinely painful, genuinely challenging to endure, but it reframes that suffering within a larger context of meaning and purpose. Instead of random pathology, your dark experiences become part of an intelligible process of transformation, a necessary phase in the soul's journey toward greater authenticity and wholeness. The alchemical texts speak of the nigredo as a time when the prima materia, the raw material of transformation, must be subjected to processes that break down its existing form completely. In psychological terms, your prima materia might be understood as your false self, the adaptive personality you develop to gain love, acceptance, and survival in environments that could not see or honor your true nature. This false self may have served you well for many years, It may have helped you achieve success, maintain relationships, navigate social situations with apparent ease, but at some point, usually triggered by a crisis or a period of prolonged stress, this false self begins to reveal its limitations. It can no longer provide the meaning, satisfaction, or authentic connection your soul requires. The nigredo begins when this false self starts to dissolve, leaving you feeling lost, confused, and emotionally devastated. Yet what appears to be psychological collapse is actually psychological opportunity. The breakdown of false structures creates the space for authentic structures to emerge. The dissolution of artificial identities allows your true identity to begin revealing itself. The death of who you thought you were becomes the birth of who you actually are. This process cannot be rushed, cannot be bypassed, cannot be shortcut through positive thinking or pharmaceutical intervention. Like the alchemical process it mirrors, it must be allowed to unfold in its own timing, according to its own inner logic. Attempts to interrupt or accelerate the nigredo often result in its prolongation, as the psyche continues to work toward the dissolution that is necessary for genuine renewal. During the nigredo, you may find yourself drawn to experiences that your normal adaptive self would avoid. You might feel compelled to spend long periods alone, to withdraw from social activities that once provided pleasure, to question beliefs and values that once seemed unshakable. These behaviors, often labeled as depressive symptoms, represent your psyche's attempt to create the conditions necessary for deep inner work. The darkness of nigredo is not uniform or constant. It has its own rhythms, its own seasons, its own subtle variations of intensity and quality. Sometimes it feels like a heavy, leaden depression that makes every movement an effort. Sometimes it manifests as anxiety so intense it seems to shake you apart at the molecular level. Sometimes it appears as a vast emptiness, a sense of meaninglessness, so complete that you wonder if you will ever feel connected to life again. Each quality of darkness carries its own teachings, its own transformative potential. The heavy depression may be teaching you to slow down, to turn inward, to pay attention to aspects of your inner life that busy activity has kept hidden. The anxiety may be alerting you to the ways you have betrayed your authentic nature, warning you when you attempt to return to patterns that no longer serve your development. The emptiness may be clearing space for new meaning to emerge, dissolving old purposes to make room for truer purposes. Learning to work with the nigredo requires developing a different relationship with time itself. In a culture obsessed with quick fixes and immediate results, the alchemical process demands patience, persistence, and faith in invisible transformations. The darkening must be allowed to complete itself, must be given the time and space it requires to accomplish its mysterious work of dissolution and preparation. This is perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of the nigredo. Learning to trust a process that appears to be leading nowhere, that seems to offer no hope of resolution, that provides no clear timeline for completion. You must develop what the alchemists called the virtue of patience, the ability to remain present with uncertainty, to continue the work even when no progress is visible. Yet, even in the deepest darkness of nigredo, there are signs for those who know how to read them. The very intensity of your suffering may indicate the proximity of breakthrough. The completeness of your dissolution may signal the nearness of renewal. The depth of your darkness may measure the height of the light that is preparing to emerge. The alchemical texts speak of moments within the nigredo, when brief flashes of insight or inspiration break through the general darkness. These glimpses are not signs that the process is complete, but rather indications that the work is proceeding correctly. They offer just enough light to maintain hope, just enough meaning to sustain commitment to the process. In your own experience of nigredo, you may recognize similar moments, brief periods when the depression lifts slightly and you catch a glimpse of deeper meaning in your suffering, when the anxiety subsides momentarily and you sense the wisdom your symptoms are trying to convey, when the emptiness reveals itself not as absence but as spaciousness, pregnant with unrealized possibilities. These moments of clarity within darkness are precious gifts, to be treasured, but not grasped, honored, but not clung to. They remind you that even in your deepest descent, you are not abandoned, not forgotten, not lost. They assure you that your darkness is not random chaos but ordered process, not meaningless suffering but meaningful transformation. The Nigredo also reveals the profound interconnection between your individual process and larger collective patterns. Your personal darkness may be connected to ancestral traumas that have been passed down through generations, seeking resolution through your willingness to feel what others could not feel, to process what others could not process. Your emotional overwhelm may be partly a response to collective shadow material that your sensitivity makes you particularly attuned to. This understanding can provide both comfort and purpose during the darkest phases of Nigredo. Your suffering is not merely personal but serves a larger healing function. Your willingness to descend into darkness creates the possibility that others in your family system, your community, your culture, might not have to repeat the same patterns of avoidance and repression that created the wounds in the first place. As the Nigredo progresses, you may begin to develop what might be called philosophical appreciation for darkness itself, not the romanticization of suffering that marks certain spiritual traditions, but a mature recognition of darkness as an essential aspect of the wholeness you seek. You begin to understand that any authentic life must include periods of dissolution, that any genuine transformation must pass through phases of apparent destruction. This appreciation for darkness transforms your relationship not only to your own difficult experiences but to the suffering of others. Having learned to honor your own Nigredo, you become capable of honoring the dark phases in others' lives without trying to fix, change, or eliminate them. You develop the rare capacity to be present with suffering without trying to solve it, to witness darkness without trying to brighten it. The Nigredo teaches you that consciousness itself has phases, that awareness has seasons, that the journey toward wholeness necessarily includes periods of apparent fragmentation. You learn that psychological health is not the absence of dark experiences, but the ability to move through them consciously, not the elimination of difficult emotions, but the capacity to feel them without being destroyed by them. In the final phases of Nigredo, you may begin to sense that something new is stirring in the depths of your dissolution, not the return of your old self, not the restoration of previous patterns, but the emergence of something unprecedented, something that could only be born from the ashes of what has been destroyed. This is the first intimation of the albedo, the whitening phase that follows Nigredo in the alchemical sequence. Yet even as you sense this emerging possibility, the wisdom of Nigredo teaches you not to grasp for it prematurely. The blackening must be complete before the whitening can begin. The dissolution must be thorough before the renewal can commence. The death must be total before the resurrection can occur. The Nigredo reveals itself, ultimately, as an act of love, the psyche's love for your authentic nature, so deep and so fierce, that it is willing to destroy everything false in order to protect and nurture everything true. Your depression, your anxiety, your overwhelming emotions are not attacks upon your well-being, but expressions of your soul's relentless commitment to your genuine development, your authentic becoming, your real life. In embracing the Nigredo consciously, you align yourself with this love, this commitment, this fierce dedication to truth. You stop fighting the process and begin cooperating with it. Stop resisting the dissolution and begin facilitating it. Stop fearing the darkness and begin trusting its hidden wisdom. You become an active participant in your own transformation, rather than a passive victim of mysterious forces. The alchemical Nigredo teaches you that darkness, consciously entered and patiently endured, becomes the womb of light, that dissolution willingly embraced becomes the foundation of new creation, that death voluntarily accepted becomes the gateway to unprecedented life. Your emotional darkness, honored rather than medicated, transforms from enemy to ally, from obstacle to opportunity, from curse to blessing. In the end, the Nigredo reveals that what you thought was your breakdown was actually your breakthrough beginning. What you experienced as your ending was actually your beginning emerging. What you feared was your destruction was actually your reconstruction preparing to unfold. The darkness you have learned to embrace becomes the light you are ready to embody. The dissolution you have allowed becomes the integration you are prepared to manifest. The death you have accepted becomes the life you are destined to live. In the vast theater of human consciousness, where individual dramas play out against the backdrop of collective themes, your struggle with emotional overwhelm reveals itself as far more than personal pathology. It emerges as a symptom of a deeper wound, a collective injury that has severed humanity from the very capacity that once made us whole, the ability to feel deeply, to connect authentically, to inhabit our emotional nature as fully as we inhabit our thinking minds. You are not broken. You are not diseased. You are not deficient. You are a sensitive being, attempting to survive in a world that has declared war on sensitivity. A feeling creature trying to navigate a landscape designed for emotional numbness. A soul seeking connection in a civilization built upon disconnection. Your overwhelm is not evidence of your inadequacy but proof of your appropriateness, your psyche's natural response to conditions that violate the basic requirements for psychological and spiritual health. The collective shadow of emotional suppression stretches back generations, perhaps centuries, to the moment when human civilization made a fateful choice to privilege thinking over feeling, doing over being, achievement over authenticity. This choice, initially perhaps necessary for survival in harsh environments, has calcified into a cultural pathology that now threatens the very survival it was meant to ensure. You have inherited this legacy, this collective wound, through family systems that taught you to be ashamed of your tears, educational institutions that rewarded intellectual performance while ignoring emotional intelligence, economic systems that demand productivity regardless of psychological cost, and social structures that pathologize sensitivity while celebrating emotional invulnerability. Your hypersensitivity is not personal dysfunction but appropriate response to collective dysfunction, not individual pathology but natural reaction to cultural pathology. The modern world has created what might be called emotional refugees, millions of sensitive souls wandering through landscapes of profound disconnection, seeking the very nourishment that the environment has systematically eliminated, like political refugees fleeing countries that can no longer sustain life. Emotional refugees move through a world that can no longer sustain feeling, searching for places where their authentic nature might be welcomed rather than pathologized. This collective shadow manifests in countless ways throughout contemporary culture. It appears in the epidemic of depression and anxiety that no amount of pharmaceutical intervention seems able to resolve, in the rising rates of addiction that represent desperate attempts to feel something in a world designed to promote numbness, in the prevalence of relationship difficulties rooted in the inability to connect emotionally with others, or even with oneself. The shadow reveals itself in the way children are medicated for behaviors that might once have been understood as natural responses to unnatural environments, in the way grief is expected to follow prescribed timelines rather than natural rhythms, in the way anger is feared and suppressed rather than honored as a messenger carrying vital information about boundary violations and unmet needs. You can trace this collective wound through your own family lineage, recognizing patterns of emotional suppression that have been passed down like genetic inheritance. Perhaps your grandparents lived through wars or depressions that required emotional shutdown for survival, developing coping mechanisms that became entrenched family patterns. Perhaps your parents absorbed messages about emotional expression being dangerous, shameful, or impractical, and unconsciously transmitted these beliefs to you through subtle but persistent communications. These ancestral patterns live in your nervous system, in your cellular memory, in the unconscious expectations you have about what it means to be safe in the world. Your emotional intensity may represent your psyche's attempt to break these ancestral patterns, to feel what previous generations could not allow themselves to feel, to process emotional material that has been accumulating in your family system for decades or longer. From this perspective, your sensitivity becomes a form of service not just to yourself but to your entire lineage. By learning to feel deeply and consciously, You create the possibility that future generations will inherit greater emotional capacity rather than greater emotional repression. By refusing to numb yourself into acceptable conformity, you maintain the connection to authentic feeling that may have been severed in your family line. The collective shadow of emotional suppression has created a world where the very qualities most essential for human flourishing, empathy, compassion, intuition, deep feeling, are systematically devalued and discouraged. This has produced a civilization remarkably skilled at manipulating the external world, but tragically inept at navigating the internal world, capable of sending humans to space but incapable of creating communities where humans can be authentically human. In such a world, your emotional overwhelm begins to make perfect sense. You are a feeling being attempting to function in systems designed by and for non-feeling beings. You are trying to maintain emotional authenticity in environments that reward emotional artificiality. You are seeking genuine connection in a culture that has substituted digital interaction for human intimacy, professional networking for authentic relationship, social media engagement for real community. The shadow appears in the way modern life systematically eliminates the conditions that support emotional well-being, while simultaneously pathologizing the emotional distress that results from these eliminations. We live in environments largely devoid of nature, community, meaningful work, spiritual connection, and authentic relationship. Then wonder why so many people experience depression, anxiety, and a sense of existential emptiness. Your sensitivity allows you to perceive what others have learned to ignore, the profound unnaturalness of so much contemporary life, the ways in which modern environments violate basic human needs, the extent to which normality itself has become a form of collective madness. Your emotional overwhelm may be your psyche's appropriate response to inappropriate conditions, your soul's rebellion against circumstances that demand you betray your own nature in order to belong. This understanding can provide both validation and direction. Validation because it confirms that your struggles are not evidence of personal inadequacy, but natural responses to collective injury. Direction because it suggests that healing involves not just individual therapeutic work but conscious engagement with the larger cultural patterns that create and maintain emotional suppression. The collective shadow reveals itself in the language we use to describe emotional experience. Feelings are described as negative or positive rather than simply informative. Emotional expression is labeled inappropriate when it exceeds narrow social boundaries. Sensitivity is pathologized as too much rather than honored as necessary attunement to subtle environmental conditions. These linguistic patterns reflect deeper assumptions about the nature of emotional life, that feelings should be controlled rather than honored, that emotional expression should be convenient rather than authentic, that sensitivity should be normalized rather than appreciated as a specialized capacity for perceiving what others miss. In recognizing the collective nature of emotional suppression, you may also begin to recognize the collective nature of emotional healing. Your individual work to develop greater emotional capacity contributes to the larger healing of the collective wound. Your willingness to feel deeply creates permission for others to access their own emotional depth. Your refusal to numb yourself helps maintain the possibility of authentic feeling in a world increasingly devoted to artificial numbness. This perspective transforms your emotional challenges from personal burden to collective service. Instead of seeing your sensitivity as private pathology, you begin to understand it as a form of cultural medicine, a way of maintaining connection to essential human capacities that the collective has temporarily lost but desperately needs to recover. The collective shadow of emotional suppression has created what might be called emotional desertification, the systematic elimination of conditions that support rich emotional life, leaving vast psychological landscapes barren of the nourishment that sensitive souls require. Yet, like plants that can survive in harsh environments by developing specialized capacities, you may be developing emotional resilience and depth that will prove essential as humanity begins the process of emotional restoration. Your overwhelm may represent not just personal struggle but collective emergence, the beginning of a cultural shift toward greater emotional intelligence, deeper sensitivity, more authentic human connection. You may be part of a generation tasked with healing wounds that previous generations could only survive by ignoring, with feeling emotions that earlier eras could only manage by suppressing. The shadow work required is both individual and collective. Personally, you must learn to honor your emotional nature while developing the capacity to function effectively in environments that may not support such nature. Collectively, humanity must begin the process of creating cultures, institutions, and relationships that support rather than suppress the full spectrum of human emotional capacity. This understanding does not minimize the very real challenges you face in learning to navigate intense emotional experiences, but it provides a context that transforms those challenges from meaningless suffering to meaningful participation in a larger process of healing and renewal. Your emotional journey becomes not just personal development, but cultural contribution, not just individual healing, but collective service. The collective shadow of emotional suppression has created a world full of emotional refugees, but it has also created the conditions that may eventually produce a generation of emotional pioneers, individuals skilled at navigating the depths of feeling, capable of maintaining authentic connection in artificial environments, committed to creating the very communities and cultures that their own healing requires. In embracing your role as both refugee and pioneer, you step into a larger story, a deeper purpose, a more meaningful understanding of what your emotional intensity is really about. You are not too sensitive for this world. This world has become too insensitive for its own good, and your sensitivity is part of what may eventually restore it to greater wholeness, authenticity, and health. Your emotional overwhelm, understood in this context, becomes not evidence of your dysfunction, but proof of your appropriate function, not sign of your inadequacy, but indication of your essential adequacy to the task of feeling what others cannot yet feel, processing what others cannot yet process, healing what others cannot yet heal. The collective shadow of emotional suppression is real, vast, and deeply entrenched, but it is not permanent, not unchangeable, not the final word on what human emotional life can become. Through your willingness to feel deeply in a world committed to shallow experience, to remain open in environments that promote closure, to maintain sensitivity in systems that reward numbness, you participate in the gradual transformation of this shadow, the slow healing of this collective wound, the eventual restoration of emotional authenticity to human culture. In the mysterious dance of psychological transformation that Jung called enantiodromia, the law by which all things eventually turn into their opposites, you stand at the threshold of perhaps the most profound reversal of all. The very emotions that have threatened to destroy you are preparing to reveal themselves as the forces of your salvation. The intensity that has felt like curse begins to unmask itself as gift. The sensitivity that has seemed like weakness shows its true face as strength. The chaos that has appeared to herald your dissolution transforms into the deeper order of your authentic becoming. This is not a shallow optimism that denies the reality of suffering, nor the spiritual bypassing that attempts to transcend difficulty through premature transcendence. This is the deep recognition that psychological extremes, when fully experienced rather than avoided, contain within themselves the seeds of their own transformation. Your overwhelming emotions paradoxically become the very force that transmutes them into wisdom, compassion, and unprecedented inner power. The principle of enantiodromia operates not through the elimination of intensity, but through its complete embrace, not through the suppression of emotional extremes, but through their full embodiment. Like a fever that burns so hot it destroys the very infection it was created to fight, your emotional intensity, when allowed to reach its natural completion, begins to consume the psychological patterns that created the need for such intensity in the first place. You may have experienced glimpses of this mysterious reversal already, moments when the deepest despair suddenly revealed unexpected layers of meaning, when overwhelming anxiety transformed into clarifying insight, when the most intense grief opened your heart to previously unknown depths of love. These experiences, however brief, point toward the profound transformation that becomes possible when psychological extremes are met with consciousness rather than resistance. The enantiodromia of emotional overwhelm requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to intensity itself. Instead of viewing your strongest emotions as problems to be solved, you begin to approach them as mysteries to be explored. Instead of asking, "How can I make this stop?" you learn to inquire, "What is this trying to become? What transformation is this intensity attempting to catalyze? What aspect of my authentic nature is this overwhelming experience trying to birth?" This shift in perspective transforms your relationship to emotional extremes from adversarial to collaborative. You stop fighting against your most intense feelings and begin working with them. Stop trying to control their expression and start learning to channel their energy consciously. You develop what might be called emotional aikido, the ability to use the force of your own intensity as the power source for transformation rather than destruction. The reversal begins when you recognize that your capacity to feel intensely is not a sign of psychological instability, but evidence of psychological vitality. In a world increasingly committed to emotional numbness, your refusal to be deadened represents a profound act of resistance, an insistence on remaining alive to the full spectrum of human experience. Your intensity becomes not pathology, but prophecy, a preview of the emotional capacity that may eventually be recognized as necessary for full human development. As you learn to inhabit your emotional extremes more consciously, you begin to discover hidden qualities within experiences that once seemed purely negative. Your deepest depression may reveal itself as forced contemplation, compelling you to examine aspects of your life that busy activity kept hidden. Your most overwhelming anxiety may transform into heightened awareness, alerting you to subtle environmental factors that others miss entirely. Your most devastating grief may open you to depths of love you never knew you possessed. This transformation requires developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold psychological opposites in conscious tension until a third thing emerges that transcends both. In the context of emotional overwhelm, this means learning to be simultaneously immersed in intense feeling and observing that feeling with detached awareness, both fully experiencing emotional extremes and maintaining perspective on those experiences. The enantiodromia reveals that what you have been experiencing as emotional chaos may actually be the dismantling of psychological patterns that no longer serve your development. Your intense emotions may be the force breaking apart rigid defensive structures, dissolving false identities, clearing space for more authentic ways of being to emerge. What feels like destruction from the perspective of the ego reveals itself as reconstruction from the perspective of the self. In the depths of this reversal, you may begin to recognize that your emotional intensity carries information, not just about your personal psychological state, but about the condition of your environment, your relationships, your culture. Your overwhelm may be partly a response to conditions that would overwhelm anyone with sufficient sensitivity to perceive them accurately. Your emotional extremes become a form of environmental feedback, alerting you to situations that violate your authentic nature. This understanding transforms emotional intensity from personal pathology into personal and environmental intelligence. Your feelings become a sophisticated guidance system, helping you navigate toward people, places, and situations that support your authentic development, while alerting you to those that require you to betray your true nature. Your sensitivity reveals itself as a specialized capacity for perceiving what others miss, feeling what others cannot feel, knowing what others do not recognize. The enantiodromia of emotional overwhelm often involves the discovery that your most intense feelings contain their own solutions. The anxiety that feels like it might destroy you may be carrying the energy needed for necessary changes in your life. The depression that seems to drain all meaning may be clearing space for more authentic meaning to emerge. The rage that threatens to consume you may contain the power required to establish boundaries you have been unable to set through gentler means. Learning to work with this reversal requires developing trust in the intelligence of your emotional system, faith in the wisdom of your psychological processes, confidence in your psyche's fundamental orientation toward healing and wholeness. You must learn to believe that your intense emotions are not random chaos, but ordered process, not meaningless suffering but meaningful transformation, attempting to unfold. The transformation becomes possible through a quality of attention that is simultaneously intimate and spacious, intimate enough to fully experience emotional intensity without numbing or dissociation, spacious enough to maintain perspective without becoming identified with temporary emotional states. You learn to be completely present with overwhelming feelings while simultaneously recognizing that these feelings are experiences you are having rather than identities you are trapped within. This paradoxical stance of being fully in the experience while not being consumed by it creates the conditions for enantiodromia to occur naturally. Your emotions are allowed to reach their full intensity and complete their natural cycle rather than being interrupted by premature intervention or prolonged by unconscious resistance. In this completion, they reveal their hidden purpose and transform into the very qualities they seem to threaten. The reversal often manifests as a sudden shift in perception that recontextualizes everything you thought you knew about your emotional nature. What you have labeled as pathological hypersensitivity reveals itself as appropriate responsiveness to subtle environmental factors. What you have diagnosed as emotional instability shows itself as natural flexibility in response to changing conditions. What you have feared as overwhelming intensity unmasks itself as life force seeking authentic expression. Through this transformation, you begin to develop what might be called emotional mastery, not the suppression or control of feelings, but the capacity to work skillfully with emotional energy, to channel intensity constructively, to use the power of strong emotions as fuel for creative expression, authentic relationship, and meaningful action. Your overwhelming feelings become overwhelming inspiration, overwhelming compassion, overwhelming commitment to truth and authenticity. The enantiodromia reveals that emotional extremes, when fully experienced and consciously integrated, become emotional capacities. Your ability to feel intense despair becomes the foundation for your capacity to experience profound joy. Your experience of overwhelming fear develops into your ability to feel genuine safety. Your familiarity with devastating loss creates your appreciation for precious connection. This reversal transforms not only your relationship to your own emotions, but your capacity to be present with intense emotions in others. Having learned to navigate your own emotional extremes without being destroyed by them, you develop the rare ability to accompany others through their most difficult feelings without trying to fix, change, or eliminate them. Your experience of transformation through rather than despite intensity becomes a gift you can offer to others struggling with overwhelming emotions. The enantiodromia teaches you that psychological health is not the absence of extreme experiences, but the capacity to move through them consciously, not the elimination of emotional intensity, but the ability to channel that intensity in service of growth, healing, and authentic expression. You learn that what modern psychology often pathologizes as dysfunction may actually be the psyche's attempt to break through to greater levels of function. In the final stages of this reversal, you may discover that what you once feared as your greatest weakness has become your greatest strength, that what you once experienced as your deepest wound is transformed into your most powerful medicine, that what once seemed like your curse has revealed itself as your calling. Your emotional intensity becomes the very force that enables you to touch others at depths where superficial comfort cannot reach, to offer healing that comes only from having been broken and consciously reassembled, to provide hope that emerges only from having traversed despair and found the light hidden within darkness. The enantiodromia of emotional overwhelm reveals that transformation is not about eliminating intensity, but about learning to work with intensity consciously, not about achieving emotional flatness, but about developing emotional range, depth, and skillful expression. Your overwhelming emotions, fully experienced and wisely integrated, become the source of your capacity to live with unprecedented authenticity, love with extraordinary depth, and serve with uncommon power. This mysterious reversal from curse to blessing, from weakness to strength, from chaos to order, represents not just personal transformation, but the emergence of a more complete way of being human, one that honors both thinking and feeling, both doing and being, both individual development and collective service. Through the conscious navigation of your emotional extremes, you become a living demonstration that intensity, when embraced rather than feared, becomes the pathway to unprecedented wholeness, meaning, and authentic power. In the ancient traditions of sacred alchemy, the vessel that contained the transformative process was considered as important as the materials being transformed. Without a proper container, one strong enough to withstand intense pressures, pure enough not to contaminate the process, and skillfully designed to allow transformation without destruction, even the most precious materials would be lost to chaos or corruption. In your journey with overwhelming emotions, you must learn to become such a vessel, developing the capacity to contain intense feelings without being consumed by them, to hold powerful emotions without being destroyed by their force. This is perhaps the most subtle and sophisticated skill in the entire repertoire of emotional development, learning the difference between feeling emotions and being emotions, between experiencing intensity and drowning in intensity, between authentic emotional expression and what might be called emotional incontinence. The sacred vessel of consciousness learns to hold the fire of feeling without being burned by it, to contain the waters of emotion without being flooded by them. The development of this capacity requires a fundamental understanding of what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in conscious tension until something new emerges that transcends both extremes. In emotional terms, this means learning to be simultaneously deeply feeling and clearly observing, completely present with emotional experience, and maintaining perspective on that experience, fully engaged with the intensity of the moment, while remaining rooted in a deeper stability that transcends any particular emotional state. This is not emotional suppression or spiritual bypassing. The sacred vessel does not seek to eliminate intense emotions, but to provide them with a conscious container within which they can unfold, complete their natural cycle, and reveal their hidden wisdom. Like a skilled alchemist who subjects materials to intense heat while maintaining careful control over the process, you learn to allow emotional intensity while maintaining conscious awareness of the larger transformation occurring. The sacred vessel understands that emotions, like all forms of energy, are neither good nor bad in themselves, but become beneficial or destructive depending on how they are held and expressed. Fire can warm a home or burn it down. Water can nourish a garden or flood a field. Wind can power a mill or destroy a village. The determining factor is not the presence or absence of these forces, but the wisdom with which they are contained and directed. Learning to become a sacred vessel begins with developing what might be called emotional spaciousness, the capacity to create internal room for intense feelings without being overwhelmed by them. This spaciousness is not distance or detachment, but a quality of conscious presence that can accommodate powerful experiences without being displaced by them. Like a large lake that can receive a rushing river without being disturbed in its depth, you learn to maintain inner stability while allowing surface turbulence. This spaciousness emerges through the cultivation of what contemplative traditions call witness consciousness, the aspect of awareness that can observe experience without being identified with it. This witness is not cold or clinical, but warmly present, not judgmental but lovingly attentive, not separate from emotion, but not identical with it either. Through developing this witnessing capacity, you learn to be intimate with your emotions without being imprisoned by them. The sacred vessel also requires what might be called emotional boundaries, not walls that keep feelings out, but membranes that allow appropriate flow while maintaining structural integrity. These boundaries help you distinguish between your emotions and others' emotions, between current feelings and past traumas, between authentic emotional responses and conditioned emotional reactions. They enable you to feel deeply without taking on everything you encounter, to be empathic without being overwhelmed by others' suffering. These boundaries are not fixed structures, but living, responsive capacities that expand and contract according to circumstances. In safe environments with trusted people, your boundaries might be quite permeable, allowing deep emotional intimacy and mutual vulnerability. In challenging environments or with difficult people, your boundaries might be more protective, allowing you to maintain your center while navigating difficult situations. The development of sacred vessel capacity often requires healing what might be called boundary wounds, early experiences that taught you that emotional vulnerability was dangerous, that feeling deeply led to abandonment or attack, that sensitivity was a liability rather than an asset. These wounds may have led you to develop either overly rigid boundaries that keep everything out, or overly permeable boundaries that let everything in, neither of which serves authentic emotional development. Healing these wounds involves learning to trust your own emotional experience, while developing the capacity to regulate emotional intensity consciously. This regulation is not suppression but skillful management, like a conductor who doesn't eliminate the power of the orchestra, but guides it toward beautiful expression. You learn to work with the energy of your emotions rather than being overwhelmed by their force. The sacred vessel learns to distinguish between different qualities of emotional experience. Primary emotions, direct responses to current circumstances, carry different information and require different responses than secondary emotions, reactions to your reactions. Emotions about having emotions, fear about feeling afraid, anger about being sad, shame about experiencing joy all represent secondary layers that often create more suffering than the original emotions themselves. By learning to identify and work with these different layers, you develop greater precision in your emotional responses. You can feel the primary emotion fully while choosing how to respond to the secondary reactions. This precision allows you to access the wisdom and energy of your emotions without being caught in the complicated tangles that often surround intense feeling. The sacred vessel also develops the capacity for what might be called emotional alchemy, the ability to transform difficult emotions not by eliminating them, but by working with them so skillfully that they reveal their hidden gifts. Anger transforms into clarity about boundaries and values. Sadness becomes appreciation for what matters most. Fear reveals itself as care for precious things. Grief opens the heart to deeper love. This alchemical transformation occurs not through force or manipulation, but through patient, loving attention to the emotions themselves. Like tending a fire that gradually transforms wood into warmth and light, you learn to tend your emotions with such care and skill that they naturally reveal their beneficial potential. The practice of becoming a sacred vessel involves developing emotional rhythm and timing. Just as there are seasons in nature, there are seasons in emotional life. Times for feeling deeply and times for integration, times for expression and times for containment, times for vulnerability and times for protection. The sacred vessel learns to honor these natural rhythms rather than demanding that emotions conform to external schedules or social expectations. This timing includes understanding when emotions need space to unfold and when they need conscious intervention, when feeling needs to be expressed and when it needs to be held in contemplative silence, when emotional experience calls for solitude and when it requires community. These skills develop through practice, attention, and growing trust in the wisdom of your own emotional system. The sacred vessel also learns to work with what might be called emotional ecology, understanding how different emotions interact with each other, how emotional climates are created and maintained, how feelings influence and are influenced by environment, relationship, and circumstance. Like a gardener who understands how different plants affect soil conditions and each other's growth, you learn to create internal and external conditions that support healthy emotional development. This ecological understanding helps you recognize that emotional overwhelm often results not from the intensity of any single feeling, but from the accumulation of unexpressed emotions, the mixing of incompatible emotional energies, or the lack of appropriate outlets for emotional expression. By developing emotional ecology awareness, you can often prevent overwhelm by addressing these underlying conditions before they reach crisis proportions. The sacred vessel develops particular skill in working with what might be called emotional paradoxes, situations where seemingly contradictory emotions coexist, where feelings that logic says should cancel each other out instead create dynamic tension that generates new possibilities. You learn to hold love and anger simultaneously, grief and gratitude together, fear and excitement in creative tension. These paradoxes, rather than being problems to be solved, become sources of creative energy, and deeper wisdom. The sacred vessel learns to contain these opposites without needing to resolve them prematurely, allowing the tension between them to generate insights and possibilities that neither emotion could produce alone. Through developing these capacities, you gradually transform from someone who is overwhelmed by emotions to someone who can work skillfully with emotional energy, from someone who fears intensity to someone who can harness intensity for creative and healing purposes, from someone who is at the mercy of feelings to someone who can collaborate consciously with the wisdom that emotions carry. The sacred vessel understands that emotional mastery is not about controlling feelings, but about developing such a loving, skillful relationship with emotional energy that it becomes a source of guidance, creativity, and authentic power. Your emotions become allies rather than enemies, teachers rather than tormentors, sources of wisdom rather than sources of suffering. This transformation enables you to offer others what might be called sacred witnessing, the capacity to be present with their intense emotions without trying to fix, change, or eliminate them, without being overwhelmed by their experience or needing to rescue them from it. Having learned to be a sacred vessel for your own intense emotions, you can offer others the rare gift of conscious, loving presence with whatever they are experiencing. The sacred vessel of emotional consciousness becomes not just a personal achievement, but a gift to the world, a demonstration that it is possible to feel deeply without being destroyed, to be sensitive without being overwhelmed, to hold intensity without losing stability. Through your example, others begin to recognize their own potential for developing these same capacities, for becoming sacred vessels themselves. In the end, learning to be a sacred vessel for intense emotions reveals that what you once feared as overwhelming force can become the very energy that powers your most authentic expression, your deepest healing, and your most meaningful service to others. The vessel that once seemed too fragile to contain such intensity discovers itself capable of holding not only your own emotions, but becoming a space where others can safely explore their own emotional depths, knowing they are witnessed by someone who has learned to navigate intensity with wisdom, skill, and love. In the darkness of your own becoming, you must learn to carry your own light. The world speaks in endless voices, offering you direction from every corner, telling you who to be, what to feel, how to heal. Yet somewhere in the depths of your being, you sense that none of these external proclamations can touch the true geography of your soul. You are being called to a different kind of journey now, one that requires you to step away from the noise of collective wisdom and descend into the sacred solitude where your authentic guidance dwells. This is the path of the hermit, not the hermit who flees from life in bitterness or defeat, but the one who understands that certain territories of the psyche can only be explored by the light of one's own consciousness. You are being invited to become your own lamp-bearer, to illuminate the inner landscape that no external authority can map for you. The world will tell you that feeling deeply is a malady to be cured, that sensitivity is weakness to be overcome, that your capacity for emotional intensity marks you as somehow broken or excessive. But you are beginning to understand that these very qualities, your ability to feel into the subtle currents of existence, your refusal to numb yourself against the full spectrum of human experience, are not symptoms of pathology but the precise instruments needed for the work of individuation. Your emotional depth is not your burden, it is your compass. It points always toward the authentic, the real, the places where life is actually being lived, rather than merely performed. While others may navigate by the bright lights of social approval or the familiar landmarks of conventional success, you are learning to read the more subtle signs, the whisper of intuition, the ache of longing that signals unexplored territory, the strange peace that comes when you align with something true even if it makes no logical sense. This requires tremendous courage, for it means accepting that your journey cannot be validated by external measures. You cannot point to your progress on any map that others would recognize. There are no milestones to mark your advancement, no degrees to earn in the subject of your own soul. You must become comfortable with the uncomfortable truth, that your deepest work unfolds in realms that remain invisible to the outer world. The lamp you carry is not the harsh fluorescent light of analysis. Though analysis has its place, it is not the seductive glow of fantasy, though imagination is essential to the work. The light you must learn to trust is the steady, quiet illumination of consciousness itself, that quality of awareness that can hold both your shadows and your light without trying to change either, that can witness your contradictions without demanding immediate resolution, that can contain your questions without rushing toward false answers. This consciousness is not something you achieve. It is something you already are, something you must learn to recognize and trust. It has been with you always, even in your darkest moments of confusion and despair. It is the part of you that can observe your own emotional storms without being swept away by them, that can witness your patterns without being enslaved by them, that can hold space for your transformation without trying to control its timing or direction. Learning to navigate by this inner light requires you to develop a different kind of relationship with your feelings. The conventional world offers you two equally limiting choices: either be overwhelmed by your emotions or shut them down entirely, either drown in the flood of feeling or build walls so high that nothing can touch you. But the path of the hermit reveals a third way, the way of conscious feeling, of emotional presence without emotional possession. This means learning to feel deeply without losing yourself in the feeling, to be moved without being swept away, to let your emotions inform you without letting them control you. It means developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposites until something new emerges, something that contains the truth of both extremes without being limited by either. Your sensitivity becomes not a weakness to be protected, but a radar system for navigating the invisible currents of meaning and possibility. You begin to understand that your capacity to feel deeply is actually your capacity to perceive deeply, to sense what others cannot, to detect the subtle energies that move beneath the surface of things, to feel your way toward truth, even when logic fails you. But this requires you to honor your perceptions even when they contradict the consensus reality around you. It requires you to trust what you sense even when you cannot prove it, to follow your intuition even when it leads you away from safety, to value your inner knowing even when it cannot be externally validated. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the hermit's path, learning to be your own authority in a world that constantly seeks to undermine your confidence in your own perceptions. The voices of the world will tell you that your feelings are too much, that your questions are too deep, that your search for meaning is self-indulgent or naive. They will offer you pills to numb the intensity, activities to distract from the depth, philosophies to explain away the mystery. But you are being called to something different, to the radical act of trusting your own experience, of honoring your own emotional landscape as valid and valuable territory worthy of exploration. This does not mean becoming lost in subjectivity or rejecting all external input. The hermit carries a lamp, not a blindfold. The light of consciousness illuminates both the inner and outer worlds, helping you navigate the relationship between them with wisdom and discernment. You learn to receive guidance from others without losing your center, to be influenced without being overwhelmed, to remain open without becoming porous. The lamp reveals that your journey is both deeply personal and mysteriously universal. The territories you explore in solitude, the patterns of your particular psyche, the themes of your individual story, the specific flavors of your wounds and gifts, somehow connect you more deeply to the human experience rather than isolating you from it. By becoming more specifically yourself, you become more genuinely available to others. By illuminating your own depths, you develop the capacity to hold space for the depths in those around you. This paradox lies at the heart of the individuation process. The more fully you inhabit your own authentic nature, the more you discover that this nature is not separate from, but intimately connected to the larger patterns of human experience. Your personal symbols link you to archetypal themes. Your individual struggles echo the timeless myths of transformation. Your specific path somehow serves the larger evolution of consciousness itself. The hermit's lamp illuminates this connection without dissolving the essential solitude of the journey. You remain alone with your choices, responsible for your own development, accountable to your own soul. No one else can walk your path or make your discoveries for you. Yet the light reveals that this aloneness is not loneliness, but rather a sacred form of companionship. Companionship with the deeper currents of existence, with the archetypal patterns that move through all human experience, with the mystery that animates life itself. Learning to navigate by this inner light changes your relationship to guidance itself. You no longer seek teachers who will tell you what to think or gurus who will solve your problems for you. Instead, you become attracted to those who can reflect back to you your own wisdom, who can help you recognize the guidance that is already arising from within, who can support you in trusting your own perceptions without trying to replace them with their own. You begin to understand that the most profound guidance comes not as instruction, but as resonance, moments when something you read or hear or witness in another person strikes a chord that was already vibrating within you, awakening you to knowledge that you somehow already possessed, but had not yet learned to trust. This is the difference between information that fills you up and wisdom that opens you up, between answers that close questions and insights that deepen inquiry. The lamp reveals that your questions are as important as your answers, perhaps more important. The questions that arise from your depths about meaning, about purpose, about love, about death, about the nature of existence itself, are not problems to be solved, but territories to be explored. They are invitations to go deeper, to feel further, to expand your capacity to hold mystery without rushing to reduce it to something manageable. Your refusal to be satisfied with shallow answers, your insistence on exploring beneath the surface of things, your inability to be content with explanations that explain nothing, these are not signs of being difficult or demanding. They are signs of being awake, of being unwilling to sleepwalk through existence, of honoring the profound questions that arise from a soul that is genuinely engaged with the mystery of being alive. The world will try to convince you that these questions are luxuries, that seeking meaning is selfish when there is so much practical work to be done, that exploring the depths of existence is a form of navel-gazing that distracts from real responsibility. But the lamp illuminates a different truth, that without this inner work, without this willingness to explore the deeper currents of existence, all outer activity becomes hollow, mechanical, disconnected from the source that gives it life and meaning. You begin to see that your sensitivity to suffering, both your own and that of others, is not a burden but a doorway. It is what prevents you from accepting easy consolations, what keeps you searching for authentic solutions, what drives you toward the kind of understanding that can actually touch and transform pain rather than simply explaining it away. Your capacity to feel deeply into difficulty is your capacity to love deeply into possibility. This changes your relationship to your own emotional intensity. Instead of seeing it as something to manage or overcome, you begin to recognize it as a form of aliveness, a way of being fully present to the experience of being human. Your tears are not signs of weakness, but expressions of your unwillingness to become numb to beauty and tragedy. Your anger is not evidence of imbalance, but a response to injustice that refuses to be normalized. Your longing is not a symptom of dissatisfaction, but an indication that you are still capable of imagining more than what currently exists. The lamp helps you distinguish between emotions that arise from authentic response to life and emotions that arise from unconscious patterns, seeking to repeat themselves. Not all feelings deserve equal attention or respect. Some emotions are messengers carrying important information about your values, your boundaries, your deepest concerns. Others are echoes of old wounds trying to recreate familiar dramas. Learning to tell the difference becomes one of the essential skills of the inner journey. This discernment cannot be learned from books or taught in workshops. It must be developed through patient observation of your own emotional landscape, through learning to sense the difference between feelings that open you to life and feelings that close you off from it, between emotions that connect you more deeply to your authentic self and emotions that pull you back into unconscious patterns. The process requires what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites, remaining present with conflicting feelings without rushing to resolve them, staying with questions even when answers are not immediately available, tolerating the discomfort of not knowing while remaining open to whatever wants to emerge. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the work, requiring you to develop a tolerance for ambiguity that goes against every instinct for certainty and control. Yet it is precisely in this space of not knowing that the new can emerge. When you stop trying to force your experience into familiar categories, when you resist the urge to explain away what doesn't fit your current understanding, when you allow yourself to be genuinely surprised by what arises from your depths, this is when transformation becomes possible, when something genuinely new can be born in the space between what was and what might be. The hermit's path teaches you that this inner work is not separate from your engagement with the world, but is actually what makes authentic engagement possible. By learning to navigate your own emotional landscape with consciousness and skill, you develop the capacity to hold space for others without losing yourself in their drama. By refusing to numb yourself to life's intensity, you maintain your ability to respond rather than merely react. By honoring your own depth, you become capable of meeting others in theirs. This is the gift that the hermit offers to the community from which they temporarily withdraw. Not answers or solutions, but presence. The quality of consciousness developed in solitude becomes available to others, not as instruction, but as invitation, not as guidance, but as possibility. By modeling what it looks like to live from authentic depth, rather than surface adaptation, you give others permission to explore their own inner territories. The lamp you carry begins to attract others who are ready for their own journey inward, who recognize in your willingness to explore the depths an invitation to honor their own questions, their own sensitivity, their own refusal to be satisfied with shallow answers. You become not a teacher, but a fellow traveler, not a guide, but a companion on the pathless path of individuation. Yet the hermit's journey never truly ends, never arrives at a final destination where all questions are answered and all conflicts resolved. The lamp reveals new territories as you develop the capacity to perceive them, new depths as you develop the courage to explore them, new questions as you develop the wisdom to appreciate their importance. The work of consciousness is not something you complete, but something you are. Not a goal you achieve, but a way of being that deepens and expands throughout your lifetime. This requires a fundamental shift from seeking external validation for your journey to finding satisfaction in the journey itself, from needing others to understand your path to being content with walking it, whether or not anyone else can see where it leads. It means learning to value the quality of your attention more than the approval of your choices, to measure your progress by the depth of your engagement rather than the results you can display. The lamp illuminates the truth that has been waiting for you all along, that you already contain everything you need for the journey, that your sensitivity is your strength, that your questions are more valuable than the answers the world tries to impose upon them, that your willingness to feel deeply is your willingness to live fully. The light you carry is not something you must earn or achieve, but something you must learn to recognize and trust. In the end, the hermit's path leads not away from life, but deeper into it, not into isolation, but into a more authentic form of connection, not into answers, but into a more profound relationship with questions. The lamp reveals that your journey inward is simultaneously your journey toward others, that by illuminating your own landscape you contribute to the illumination of the collective darkness, that by refusing to accept easy consolations for yourself, you help create space for others to explore their own authentic depth. The light you carry becomes not just your own, but a contribution to the larger work of consciousness, a small flame in the darkness that others can use to kindle their own fires, a proof that it is possible to navigate by inner guidance in a world that has largely forgotten how to look within for direction. This is the ultimate gift of the hermit's journey, not what you discover for yourself alone, but what your courage to explore makes possible for others who are ready to begin their own descent into the sacred territories of the soul. In the secret chamber of your becoming, two ancient lovers prepare for their eternal wedding. For too long they have existed as exiles from each other, feeling banished to the realm of chaos and overwhelm, wisdom retreating into the cold castle of detachment and analysis. Yet the great work of individuation demands their reunion, the sacred marriage that the alchemists called the conjunctio, where opposites do not merely coexist, but transform each other into something entirely new, something that transcends the limitations of both while honoring the essential nature of each. You have traveled far to reach this moment. You have descended into the underworld of your own unconscious, faced the shadow aspects of your nature, learned to carry your own light through the territories where no external guidance could reach. Now you stand at the threshold of the most mysterious transformation of all, the wedding of your capacity to feel deeply with your ability to see clearly, the marriage of emotional truth with psychological wisdom. This is not the false union of suppressing feeling with logic, nor the equally false union of drowning wisdom in emotional chaos. This is the alchemical marriage that creates what Jung called the individuated personality, someone who has learned to live from their authentic center, someone who can honor their feelings without being enslaved by them, someone who can embrace sensitivity while developing discernment, someone who becomes a bridge between the world of meaning and the world of experience. The bride in this sacred wedding is your feeling nature, not the distorted emotions that arise from unconscious patterns and unhealed wounds, but the pure capacity to respond authentically to life, to let yourself be moved by beauty and outraged by injustice, to feel your way toward truth, even when logic fails you, to trust the wisdom that comes through the body and the heart, as well as through the mind. She is your sensitivity, your empathy, your ability to sense the subtle currents that move beneath the surface of things. The bridegroom is your wisdom, not the cold wisdom that analyzes life from a safe distance, but the living wisdom that emerges from conscious engagement with experience, the discernment that can hold paradox without rushing toward false resolution, the understanding that grows not from accumulating information, but from integrating what life teaches through both joy and suffering. He is your capacity for perspective, your ability to see patterns, your skill at navigating complexity without losing yourself in it. For most of your life, these two have seemed incompatible, even antagonistic. Your feeling nature has accused your wisdom of being cold and disconnected, of analyzing away the very experiences that give life its meaning and intensity. Your wisdom has accused your feeling nature of being chaotic and unreliable, of overwhelming you with intensity that serves no constructive purpose, of leading you into experiences that bring more pain than insight. This antagonism reflects one of the deepest splits in human consciousness, the false belief that we must choose between feeling and thinking, between being open and being wise, between honoring our emotional truth and developing our capacity for discernment. The world offers us countless examples of this split. The intellectual who lives entirely in their head, disconnected from the wisdom of the body and heart, and the emotional person who drowns in feeling without developing the skills to navigate complexity with consciousness and skill. But you are being called to transcend this false dichotomy, to discover that feeling and wisdom are not opponents but dance partners, each enhancing the other's capacity to engage with life more fully and authentically. The wedding of these inner aspects creates something that neither could achieve alone, a way of being that is both deeply feeling and profoundly wise, both open and discerning, both sensitive and strong. This marriage begins with recognizing that your emotional depth and your psychological wisdom arise from the same source. Your refusal to accept superficial answers, your insistence on exploring beneath the surface of things, your commitment to authentic engagement with the mystery of existence, your capacity to feel deeply and your ability to see clearly are both expressions of your fundamental aliveness, your unwillingness to sleepwalk through life, your dedication to being genuinely present to whatever arises. The feeling bride brings to this marriage her gift of immediacy, her ability to respond to life in real time, to be touched by beauty and moved by suffering, to sense what cannot be measured or quantified, to feel her way toward truth, Even when logic provides no clear path, she brings the wisdom of the body, the intelligence of the heart, the knowing that comes through direct experience rather than abstract analysis. Yet she also brings her vulnerabilities, her tendency to be overwhelmed by intensity, her difficulty distinguishing between authentic response and unconscious reaction, her susceptibility to being swept away by the very currents she is trying to navigate. Without the stabilizing presence of conscious wisdom, she can become lost in emotional storms, reactive rather than responsive, enslaved by feelings rather than informed by them. The bridegroom of wisdom brings his gift of perspective, his ability to see patterns and connections, to hold complexity without being paralyzed by it, to maintain his center even in the midst of chaos, to learn from experience without being crushed by it. He brings the capacity for discernment, the skill of holding multiple truths simultaneously, the ability to respond rather than merely react. Yet, he too brings his limitations, his tendency toward detachment, his difficulty trusting what cannot be logically proven, his inclination to analyze away the very experiences that might teach him something new. Without the animating presence of authentic feeling, he becomes dry and mechanical, wise perhaps, but not alive, understanding but not transformed. The sacred marriage transforms both partners. The feeling nature learns that consciousness does not diminish intensity but rather deepens it, that the capacity to observe her own emotions creates space for them to move and change, rather than becoming stuck or stagnant. She discovers that wisdom is not the enemy of feeling, but its ally, not something that kills spontaneity, but something that creates the container within which authentic spontaneity can flourish. Through this marriage, your emotions become not chaotic forces that overwhelm you, but intelligent responses that inform you. Your sensitivity develops discrimination. You learn to distinguish between feelings that arise from authentic response to life and feelings that arise from unconscious patterns, seeking to repeat themselves. Your empathy develops boundaries. You learn to feel with others without losing yourself in their experience, to be moved by their pain without taking responsibility for healing it. The wisdom nature, in turn, learns that feeling is not chaos to be controlled, but intelligence to be honored, not interference with clear thinking, but essential information that thinking alone cannot provide. He discovers that the heart has its own logic, that the body carries its own wisdom, that some truths can only be known through direct experience, rather than abstract analysis. Through this marriage, your wisdom becomes not cold analysis, but living understanding, not detached observation, but conscious participation. Your thinking develops heart. You learn to pursue not just any truth, but truth that serves life, not just any knowledge, but knowledge that contributes to healing and growth. Your perspective develops compassion. You learn to see clearly, without losing your capacity to be moved by what you see. This integration creates what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposites until something new emerges, something that contains the truth of both extremes without being limited by either. You develop the ability to feel deeply while maintaining perspective, to be moved by life while retaining your center, to respond authentically while acting wisely. The wedding ceremony itself takes place in the depths of your being, in moments when the false separation between feeling and wisdom collapses, and you experience yourself as whole. These moments cannot be manufactured or scheduled. They arise spontaneously when you are genuinely present to life, when you stop trying to control your experience and allow yourself to be both felt and witnessed, both participant and observer in the drama of your own becoming. Sometimes this integration happens in moments of great beauty, when your heart opens so completely to what you are witnessing that your entire being is reorganized around this opening, when the beauty you perceive outside becomes inseparable from the beauty you feel within. In these moments, feeling and wisdom unite in a recognition that transcends analysis. You know not through thinking but through being, not through understanding but through participation. Sometimes it happens in moments of great difficulty, when suffering strips away all your familiar defenses and you are left with nothing but the raw immediacy of experience. In these moments, you may discover that your capacity to feel pain fully is inseparable from your capacity to transform it wisely, that your willingness to be broken open by life creates the space for something new to be born. Sometimes it happens in the quiet moments of ordinary life, when you are simply present to what is arising: a conversation with a friend, a walk in nature, a moment of creative expression, and you find yourself responding from a place that is both deeply feeling and profoundly wise, both authentically yourself and mysteriously more than yourself. These moments of integration teach you that the wedding of feeling and wisdom is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It is an ongoing process, a daily choice to honor both aspects of your nature, a continuous practice of bringing consciousness to your emotional life and feeling to your conscious awareness. The marriage must be renewed again and again, recommitted to in each new situation, each fresh challenge, each unexpected opportunity for growth. The individuated personality that emerges from this ongoing integration is not someone who has solved all their problems or achieved some state of permanent balance. It is someone who has learned to live consciously with their contradictions, who can hold their questions as sacred space rather than problems to be solved, who can engage with life's complexity without losing their authentic center. This person can feel deeply without drowning in emotion, can think clearly without disconnecting from life, can be both tender and strong, both open and boundaried, both compassionate and discerning. They have learned what Jung meant when he spoke of holding the tension of opposites, not choosing between feeling and wisdom, but finding the place where both can coexist and enhance each other. Your sensitivity becomes your strength rather than your vulnerability when it is wedded to consciousness. Your ability to feel deeply becomes your ability to perceive subtly, to sense what others miss, to respond to life's deeper currents rather than just its surface phenomena. You develop what might be called emotional intelligence, not the ability to manipulate emotions for strategic purposes, but the capacity to receive the information that emotions provide while maintaining the freedom to choose your response. Your wisdom becomes alive rather than abstract when it is wedded to authentic feeling. Your understanding deepens beyond mere intellectual knowledge to become embodied knowing, truth that is not just thought but lived, perspective that emerges not from detached analysis but from conscious participation in the full spectrum of human experience. You develop what might be called compassionate wisdom, understanding that serves not just knowledge, but healing, insight that contributes not just to personal growth, but to the healing of the collective wounds that we all carry. The marriage of feeling and wisdom creates in you what the alchemists called the philosophical child, something genuinely new that could not exist without the union of its parents, yet is not simply a combination of their qualities but a transformation of both into something unprecedented. This child is your individuated self, the person you were always meant to become but could only become through the conscious integration of all aspects of your nature. This integrated self can serve as a bridge in a world that desperately needs bridges, between thinking and feeling, between masculine and feminine principles, between individual development and collective healing, between spiritual aspiration and psychological grounding, between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. You become someone who can translate between different languages of human experience, who can help others see that they do not have to choose between depth and functionality, between sensitivity and strength, between being real and being effective. The world needs people who have learned to wed feeling with wisdom, who can respond to suffering with both compassion and discernment, who can face complexity without either becoming overwhelmed by it or oversimplifying it, who can hold space for transformation without trying to control its direction or timing. The world needs people who can feel into what is needed without losing themselves in others' pain, who can see clearly without becoming hardened by what they see, who can act wisely without disconnecting from the heart truth that gives all action its meaning. Your journey toward this integration serves not only your own development, but the evolution of human consciousness itself. Each person who learns to bridge the false divide between feeling and wisdom contributes to healing the collective split that keeps humanity trapped in destructive patterns, either drowning in unconscious emotionality or freezing in defended rationality, either overwhelmed by empathy or hardened by cynicism, either lost in personal drama or disconnected from personal truth. The wedding of feeling and wisdom that takes place within you becomes a template for healing in the world around you. Your relationships become laboratories for this integration, places where you can practice being both authentic and conscious, both open and boundaried, both compassionate and discerning. Your work becomes an expression of this marriage, whatever you do, being informed both by heartfelt care for what matters and clear-eyed assessment of what is possible and practical. Your very presence becomes a healing force in a world that has forgotten how to feel wisely or think compassionately. Without having to teach or preach or explain, you demonstrate through your way of being that the ancient split between head and heart is not necessary, that it is possible to be both deeply feeling and profoundly wise, that the integration of opposites creates not compromise but transcendence. Yet this integration never reaches a final completion, never arrives at a static state where all conflicts are resolved and all growth is finished. The marriage of feeling and wisdom is a living process that deepens and evolves throughout your lifetime, presenting new challenges and revealing new possibilities at each stage of your development.
As you age, your feelings may become more subtle but no less important. Your wisdom may become more nuanced but no less passionate. The integration that serves you in youth may need to be renewed in midlife, reconstellated again in elderhood. The wedding is not a single ceremony, but an ongoing commitment, not a destination but a way of traveling, not an achievement but a practice. This ongoing process requires tremendous patience with yourself, compassion for your continued contradictions, humor about your persistent tendency to split apart what you are trying to integrate. It requires the humility to keep learning from experience, even when you think you already know, to keep being surprised by life even when you think you understand its patterns, to keep growing even when growth feels like dissolution. The Carl teaches you that transformation is not about perfection, but about wholeness, not about eliminating your difficulties, but about engaging with them more consciously, not about transcending your humanity, but about inhabiting it more fully. The sacred marriage creates not a person without problems, but a person with the capacity to meet their problems as opportunities for further growth, further integration, further awakening to the mystery of what it means to be both human and divine, both individual and universal, both feeling and wise. In the end, you discover that this wedding has been taking place all along, in every moment when you chose presence over avoidance, consciousness over reactivity, authentic response over conditioned pattern. Every time you allowed yourself to feel without losing your center, every time you saw clearly without closing your heart, every time you responded to life with both sensitivity and wisdom, you were participating in this ancient alchemy, contributing to the ongoing creation of something new in the world, a way of being human that honors both our feeling nature and our capacity for wisdom, that bridges what has been divided, that makes whole what has been fractured, that births what is trying to be born in the marriage of all that we have been with all that we are becoming. There comes a moment in the deepest chambers of your becoming when you realize that what you have carried as burden was always meant to be blessing. What you have worn as wound reveals itself as crown. The very sensitivity that the world taught you to hide, to medicate, to apologize for. This becomes the golden thread that weaves you back into the sacred fabric of what it means to be truly alive. Listen now to the whisper that rises from the depths of your feeling heart. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were never a problem to be solved or a sensitivity to be cured. You were a reminder. You were medicine walking in human form, carrying within your nervous system the memory of what we have collectively forgotten, how to feel the world with the entirety of our being. In this civilization that has made an art form of emotional numbing, you stand as a living contradiction to the mythology of comfortable disconnection. Every tear you have shed in response to beauty, every overwhelming wave of empathy that has knocked you sideways, every moment when your heart broke open at the suffering of strangers, these were not signs of your weakness, but testimonies to your wholeness. They were proof that somewhere within you the original template of human feeling remained intact,
uncorrupted by the collective agreement to feel less in order to function more. The gift of your feeling heart is not personal, it is archetypal. You carry within your emotional depths the memory of humanity before it learned to armor itself against its own aliveness. You are a keeper of the ancient knowing, that feeling is not the enemy of thinking, but its deepest partner, that the heart is not the opposite of wisdom, but its most profound source. In a world that has forgotten how to grieve its losses, how to celebrate its beauty, how to feel its way toward truth, you stand as a living library of emotional authenticity. But this gift did not come without its initiations. The very quality that makes you medicine for the world first had to wound you, had to break you open, had to strip away every false protection until you stood naked in your capacity to feel. The path to becoming a gift to the collective unconscious led through the valley of personal overwhelm, through nights when your sensitivity felt like a curse, through days when you begged the universe to make you less permeable to the pain of existence. This is the cruel paradox of the feeling heart's initiation. You must first experience your gift as burden before you can offer it as blessing. The very sensitivity that will eventually serve the healing of humanity's emotional disconnection must first isolate you, must first make you feel too much in a world that feels too little, must first convince you that you are the problem rather than the solution. In the mythology of your emotional development, there was a time when you believed the world's story about feelings, that they were inconvenient interruptions to efficiency, embarrassing displays of weakness, problems to be managed rather than wisdom to be honored. You learned to apologize for your tears, to minimize your empathy, to treat your emotional responses as evidence of your failure to adapt to a heartless world. You internalized the collective trauma of disconnection and wore it as personal inadequacy. But somewhere in the depths of your journey toward wholeness, you began to question this story. Perhaps it began with the recognition that your most profound insights came not through thinking but through feeling, that your deepest knowing emerged not from analysis but from the felt sense of truth resonating in your body. Perhaps it dawned on you slowly that your emotional responses to the world were not random neuroses but precise instruments of perception, attuned to subtleties that escaped more defended hearts. The gift of your feeling heart reveals itself first as a form of knowing that transcends rational understanding. You can sense the emotional currents beneath conversations, feel the unspoken grief in crowded rooms, know the truth of situations through the quality of feeling they evoke in your body. This is not psychic phenomenon, but emotional intelligence in its most refined form, the capacity to read the world through the language of feeling, to navigate reality through the compass of the heart. In a culture that has privileged thinking over feeling for so long that it has forgotten they were ever meant to dance together, your feeling heart becomes a form of resistance every time you choose to stay open when the world counsels closure, every moment you allow yourself to be moved when others have learned to remain unmoved. You are quietly revolutionizing what it means to be human in this time of collective emotional numbing. The gift of your feeling heart extends beyond personal navigation into collective healing. In the hidden dimensions of the psyche, your willingness to feel what others have learned to avoid serves a function that transcends individual experience. When you cry the tears that others have swallowed, when you feel the grief that others have buried, when you carry the empathy that others have abandoned, you are doing more than processing your own emotions. You are metabolizing the collective shadow of unfelt feeling. This is the mystery of emotional contagion, working in reverse. Just as trauma can pass through generations, so can healing. Just as numbing can become a collective strategy for survival, so can the courage to feel become a gift to the whole. Your refusal to shut down your emotional responsiveness creates ripples in the field of collective consciousness, permission structures for others to remember their own capacity to feel deeply. In the secret chambers of your sensitivity, you have become a kind of emotional archaeologist, excavating feelings that the culture has buried, giving voice to experiences that the collective has agreed to silence. Your tears become prayers for all who have forgotten how to cry. Your joy becomes celebration for all who have lost touch with wonder. Your anger becomes sacred fire for all who have swallowed their righteous indignation. Your fear becomes honest acknowledgement of all who pretend invulnerability. The gift of your feeling heart is not always comfortable for those around you. In your presence, others may feel the stirring of their own buried emotions, the uncomfortable awakening of feelings they have worked hard to suppress. Your emotional authenticity can serve as an unwelcome mirror, reflecting back to others the cost of their chosen numbness, the price they have paid for emotional safety. This is why the path of the feeling heart often includes periods of isolation, times when your emotional honesty makes others uncomfortable, moments when you are criticized for being too sensitive or too intense or too much. These reactions are not verdicts on your inadequacy but testimonies to your power, not evidence of your dysfunction but proof of your medicine. In a world that has made emotional numbness a virtue, your capacity to feel deeply will inevitably be experienced as a threat to the established order of defended hearts. But here is where the gift of your feeling heart transforms from personal burden into collective service. In your willingness to bear the discomfort of being too much in a world of too little, you hold space for the possibility of emotional authenticity. In your refusal to numb yourself into acceptable numbness, you maintain the template for what it looks like to be fully alive in a world that has chosen living death. The gift of your feeling heart carries within it the seeds of cultural transformation. Every time you choose feeling over numbing, authenticity over approval, emotional truth over comfortable lies, you are contributing to a quiet revolution in human consciousness. You are helping to heal the wound of disconnection that has become the defining pathology of modern civilization. In the depths of your sensitivity, you have discovered that feeling is not the opposite of strength, but its most profound expression. The courage it takes to remain emotionally open in a world that rewards emotional closure is a form of heroism that goes largely unrecognized but desperately needed. Your willingness to feel everything is not weakness, but the most radical form of strength, the strength to remain permeable to life itself. The gift of your feeling heart extends into every domain of human experience. In your relationships, you offer the medicine of emotional presence, the healing balm of someone who can meet others in the depths of their feeling, without trying to fix or change or minimize. In your work, you bring the wisdom of emotional intelligence, the capacity to sense what is needed, to respond to the human elements that others might miss. In your creative expressions, you channel the raw material of authentic emotion into forms that can touch and awaken others. But perhaps most importantly, in the simple act of living with your heart wide open, you model a different way of being human. You demonstrate that it is possible to feel deeply and still function, to be emotionally responsive and still maintain boundaries, to carry sensitivity as strength rather than burden. Your very existence becomes a form of teaching, a living example of what it looks like to choose consciousness over comfort. The gift of your feeling heart is not without its shadows. The very quality that makes you medicine for the world can also become its own form of suffering when it remains unconscious. When you take on the pain of others without maintaining energetic boundaries, when you mistake emotional absorption for emotional service, learning to carry your gift consciously becomes part of the maturation process, discovering how to feel deeply without drowning, how to serve as emotional medicine without sacrificing your own well-being. This is where the gift of your feeling heart requires the cultivation of what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox, to be both emotionally open and energetically protected, both deeply feeling and wisely boundaried. You learn to feel with others without losing yourself in their feeling, to serve as emotional witness without becoming emotional casualty. The development of conscious feeling becomes an art form, a practice that requires both courage and discernment. You learn to distinguish between emotions that belong to you and emotions that belong to others, between feelings that serve your growth and feelings that drain your vitality, between emotional responses that carry wisdom and emotional reactions that perpetuate unconsciousness. In this conscious development of your emotional gift, you discover that not all feelings are created equal. Some emotions are doorways to deeper truth, while others are protective strategies that keep truth at bay. Some feelings connect you more deeply to life, while others disconnect you from your authentic nature. The gift of your feeling heart includes the growing capacity to discern which emotions to follow and which to simply acknowledge and release. The gift of your feeling heart becomes a form of spiritual practice, a way of engaging with life that honors both your individual emotional truth and your service to the collective healing of humanity's emotional disconnection. You learn to feel not just for the sake of feeling, but for the sake of understanding, not just to experience emotion, but to extract its wisdom, not just to be moved by life, but to be transformed by the encounter. In the mythology of your emotional development, you move from victim of your sensitivity to steward of your gift, from someone overwhelmed by feeling to someone who can channel feeling into conscious service. This transmission does not happen overnight, but unfolds across the seasons of your life, each cycle bringing deeper understanding of how to carry your emotional nature as both personal treasure and collective medicine. The gift of your feeling heart reveals itself as a form of love, not the sentimental love that avoids difficult feelings, but the fierce love that is willing to feel everything for the sake of truth, connection, and authentic presence. This love does not seek to be comfortable but to be real, does not aim to be popular but to be honest, does not try to be easy but to be transformative. Your feeling heart becomes a vessel through which life can experience itself more fully, a channel through which the universe can feel its own aliveness. In your willingness to be emotionally present to whatever arises, you offer yourself as an instrument of consciousness, allowing life to know itself through the depth and breadth of human feeling. The gift of your feeling heart extends beyond the personal, into the transpersonal, beyond the individual into the archetypal. You become a representative of the feeling function in a world that has over-identified with thinking, a keeper of emotional wisdom in a culture that has forgotten how to feel its way toward truth. Your sensitivity becomes not personal pathology but collective medicine, not individual burden but species-wide gift. In the secret chambers of your emotional development, you discover that your capacity to feel deeply is connected to your capacity to love deeply, to know deeply, to serve deeply. The very quality that once made you feel isolated from the world becomes the bridge that connects you more profoundly to all of life. Your feeling heart reveals itself as both personal treasure and cosmic function, both individual gift and universal service. The gift of your feeling heart is ultimately the gift of presence, the capacity to be fully present to whatever is arising without needing to change it, fix it, or escape from it. In a world that has mastered the art of emotional absence, your willingness to be emotionally present becomes a form of healing that extends far beyond your personal sphere, into the collective unconscious of humanity. Your feeling heart becomes a lighthouse in the storm of collective numbing, a beacon that reminds others of their own capacity to feel, to love, to be moved by the mystery of existence. In your willingness to remain emotionally alive in a world that has chosen emotional death, you serve as living proof that another way is possible, that we do not have to sacrifice our aliveness for our safety, our authenticity for our acceptance. The gift of your feeling heart is not something you give despite your challenges, but because of them, not in spite of your sensitivity but through it. Every tear that has watered the ground of your becoming, every overwhelm that has cracked you open to greater capacity, every moment of emotional intensity that has forced you to discover new depths of resilience, all of this has been in service of developing the gift that the world desperately needs, but rarely recognizes. In the end, the gift of your feeling heart is the gift of your full humanity offered in service to the healing of humanity's wound of disconnection. You who were taught to see your sensitivity as weakness discover it as your greatest strength. You who were told you were too much learn that you are exactly enough. You who believed you were broken realize you were always blessed, always medicine, always gift waiting only for the recognition that would allow you to offer yourself consciously to the world that needs your feeling heart more than you ever dared to imagine. In the final chamber of your becoming, where all the threads of your journey weave themselves into the tapestry of conscious choice, you arrive at the most profound question the feeling heart can ask itself. Would you choose this again? If you knew all that your emotional sensitivity would cost you, every overwhelming wave, every moment of feeling too much in a world that feels too little, every tear shed in the darkness of misunderstanding, would you still choose the path of the open heart over the protected fortress of numbness? This is your eternal return, your moment of ultimate reckoning with the truth of who you have chosen to become. Like Nietzsche's daemon whispering in the ear of eternity, the question arrives not as philosophical speculation but as lived reality. You must live this life again, exactly as you have lived it, feeling everything you have felt, carrying every sensitivity you have carried, bearing every gift and every burden of your emotional nature. Do you say yes? The answer that rises from the depths of your being carries with it all the weight of your journey, all the wisdom earned through your descent into the underworld of feeling, all the gold extracted from the lid of your most overwhelming emotional experiences. Yes, you whisper to the cosmos, yes. Again and again and forever yes. Not because it has been easy, it has been the hardest thing you have ever done. Not because it has been comfortable. It has shattered every comfortable illusion you ever held about what it means to be safely human. But because it has been real, because it has been real. This yes that emerges from your depths is not the yes of recognition, not the yes of someone who has no choice, but the yes of someone who has chosen with full awareness of all that the choice entails. You have tasted both sides of the human experience, the numbed safety of emotional protection and the raw aliveness of emotional presence, and you choose presence. You choose feeling. You choose the courage to remain permeable to life itself. In this moment of eternal choosing, you understand that your relationship with emotional intensity has undergone a fundamental transformation. What began as unconscious compulsion has evolved into conscious selection. Where once you were victim of your sensitivity, you now stand as its sovereign. The feelings still come with the same intensity. The world still offers the same overwhelming input, but you meet it all from a different place. Not as someone happening to feeling, but as someone choosing feeling as your way of being human. This is the mystery of the eternal return applied to the emotional realm. The external circumstances remain largely the same, but your internal relationship to those circumstances has been revolutionized. The person who once drowned in the ocean of feeling now swims consciously in those same waters, no longer fighting the current, but learning to navigate by the stars of wisdom earned through emotional depths. Your emotional sensitivity no longer feels like something that happens to you, but something you participate in consciously. You understand now that every feeling is a doorway, every emotional intensity an invitation to deeper understanding, every overwhelm an opportunity to discover new capacities for presence and resilience. What once felt like emotional chaos now reveals itself as emotional intelligence in its most refined form. The eternal return of your feeling nature means that you will continue to feel deeply, perhaps even more deeply than before, but now you feel from choice rather than compulsion, from wisdom rather than woundedness, from love rather than lack. The tears still come, but they are conscious tears. The overwhelm still visits, but it is witnessed overwhelm. The intensity still arises, but it is met with presence rather than resistance. In this conscious choosing of your emotional nature, you discover that the very quality you once wished to escape has become the quality you would never surrender. Your sensitivity is no longer something you apologize for, but something you celebrate. No longer a burden you carry, but a gift you offer. No longer a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The eternal return reveals that your journey was never about learning to feel less, but about learning to feel more consciously. It was never about developing emotional armor, but about developing emotional wisdom. It was never about protecting yourself from the intensity of feeling, but about learning to dance with that intensity as a partner in your ongoing becoming. You realize now that every moment when you chose to remain open instead of shutting down, every instance when you selected feeling over numbing, every time you said yes to the full catastrophe of human emotion, all of these were rehearsals for this ultimate choice, this eternal yes to the path of the feeling heart. Each small choosing prepared you for this larger choosing, each momentary preference for authenticity over safety, built toward this fundamental orientation toward aliveness over protection. The eternal return of choosing feeling over numbing becomes not a burden but a celebration, not a cross to bear but a crown to wear. You understand now that your emotional depth is not something that happened to you accidentally, but something you have actively cultivated, not a genetic lottery you lost, but a spiritual lottery you won. Your capacity to feel deeply is your way of participating in the sacred mystery of existence, your method of joining the eternal dance between consciousness and cosmos. In the mythology of your emotional development, this moment represents the marriage of opposites, the union of your vulnerable feeling nature with your warrior capacity to choose that vulnerability again and again. You become both the tender heart that feels everything and the fierce protector of that heart's right to remain open. You embody the paradox of strength through sensitivity, power through permeability, invincibility through emotional honesty. The eternal return teaches you that the path you have walked was never meant to be walked once and then abandoned, but to be chosen fresh, each day, each moment, each time life presents you with the option to feel or to numb, to open or to close, to be present to your emotional truth, or to escape into comfortable disconnection. Every day becomes a new opportunity to say yes to the path of the feeling heart. This daily choosing transforms your emotional sensitivity from something you simply are into something you actively become, from fixed identity into dynamic practice, from static trait into living spiritual discipline. Your feelings become not just experiences you have, but choices you make, not just phenomena you endure, but wisdom you embody, not just sensitivity you carry, but consciousness you express. The eternal return reveals that your emotional journey has no final destination, no ultimate arrival where you will no longer need to choose feeling over numbing. The choice itself is the destination. The choosing itself is the achievement. The daily recommitment to emotional authenticity itself is the spiritual practice that makes your life sacred. In this endless return to the fundamental choice, you discover that your emotional sensitivity has become a form of prayer, a way of saying yes to life with the entirety of your being. Every tear becomes an offering. Every moment of overwhelm becomes a genuflection before the mystery of existence. Every instance of feeling too much becomes evidence of your commitment to feeling enough. Your choosing becomes a form of art, the art of living emotionally authentic in an emotionally defended world. Like any art, it requires practice, refinement, dedication, and a willingness to make mistakes and begin again. The eternal return means that you will have infinite opportunities to perfect this art, countless moments to choose feeling over numbing with greater skill, deeper wisdom, more conscious participation. The eternal return of your emotional choosing becomes a gift not only to yourself, but to all those who witness your unwavering commitment to feeling. In your daily yes to emotional authenticity, you model what it looks like to choose consciousness over comfort, aliveness over safety, truth over convenience. Your example becomes permission for others to examine their own relationship with feeling, to question their own strategies of emotional numbing. This is how individual transformation becomes collective medicine, through the simple but radical act of choosing differently, again and again, until the choice becomes so natural, it looks like nature itself. Your emotional authenticity becomes so integrated that it appears effortless, though you know the effort it requires, not the effort of strain, but the effort of surrender, not the effort of forcing, but the effort of allowing, not the effort of controlling, but the effort of remaining present to whatever rises. The eternal return teaches you that your sensitivity was never meant to be cured, but to be consecrated, never meant to be eliminated, but to be elevated, never meant to be managed, but to be marveled at. In choosing your emotional nature again and again, you transform it from personal pathology into personal mythology, from individual burden into individual glory. Your feeling heart becomes your signature in the world, your unique way of participating in the universal human experience. Just as every fingerprint is different, your particular pattern of emotional responsiveness becomes your distinctive contribution to the collective human symphony of feeling. In choosing to honor rather than hide your sensitivity, you add your voice to the chorus of those who refuse to let human feeling die out in the name of convenience. The eternal return reveals that your emotional sensitivity is not something you outgrow, but something you grow into more fully with each passing year. Like wine aging in the cellar of your soul, your capacity to feel deepens and refines with time, becoming more nuanced, more complex, more consciously integrated into your overall being. You understand now that maturity does not mean feeling less, but feeling more wisely, not becoming less sensitive, but becoming more skillful in how you carry your sensitivity. The eternal return means you will have lifetimes worth of opportunities to master the art of conscious feeling, to perfect the practice of emotional presence, to refine your capacity to be moved by life without being overwhelmed by it. In this eternal choosing of feeling over numbing, you discover that your emotional sensitivity has become inseparable from your spiritual path. Your willingness to feel everything becomes your way of honoring the sacred in the mundane, your method of finding the divine in the difficult, your practice of discovering meaning in the overwhelming. Every emotion becomes a teacher, every feeling a doorway, every moment of intensity an invitation to deeper communion with the mystery of existence. The eternal return means that you will continue to encounter situations that trigger your sensitivity, relationships that activate your emotional intensity, experiences that threaten to overwhelm your nervous system. But now you meet these encounters as a conscious participant rather than unconscious victim, as someone who has chosen this path with full awareness, rather than someone who has been forced onto it against their will. Your emotional sensitivity becomes a compass that guides you toward what is most alive, most authentic, most true in any given situation. Instead of trying to override or manage your emotional responses, you learn to listen to them as sources of information, to honor them as forms of intelligence, to follow them as guides toward greater aliveness and deeper truth. The eternal return of choosing feeling over numbing transforms your sensitivity from liability into asset, from weakness into strength, from burden into blessing. You realize that in a world full of people who have forgotten how to feel their way toward truth, your emotional responsiveness makes you invaluable, not despite your sensitivity but because of it. In the end, the eternal return brings you full circle to where you started, but as T.S. Eliot promised, you know the place for the first time. You return to your essential nature as a feeling being, but now you return as the conscious guardian of that nature, rather than its unconscious victim. You come home to your emotional sensitivity as the hero returning from the underworld, bearing the treasure of wisdom earned through descent into the depths of human feeling. The eternal return is not repetition, but spiral ascent, not going backward but going deeper, not returning to where you were, but arriving where you were always meant to be. Your emotional sensitivity, which began as unconscious overwhelming, has become conscious choosing. Your feeling heart, which started as wound, has become crown. Your willingness to be emotionally present, which felt like curse, reveals itself as calling. Would you choose this again? The question echoes through eternity, and your answer echoes back with the force of absolute certainty. Yes, yes to the tears and the laughter, yes to the overwhelm and the ecstasy, yes to feeling too much in a world that feels too little, yes to remaining emotionally alive in the face of collective numbing, yes, again and again, forever, yes, not because it is easy, but because it is real, not because it is comfortable, but because it is true, not because it is safe, but because it is sacred. In this eternal yes, you find your peace. In this endless choosing, you discover your purpose. In this lifetime commitment to feeling over numbing, you claim your crown as one who chose consciousness over comfort, authenticity over approval, life over living death. The eternal return becomes eternal celebration of the choice that makes you most fully human, the choice to keep your heart open, to remain emotionally present, to feel your way toward truth in a world that has forgotten how to feel at all.